Coming up, Politics Live, Joe Coburn.
And they're off. Polls next month in 2 by-elections. Mortgage pain for homeowners and Prime Minister's questions at noon. This is Politics Live. Joining me today, Conservative MP Miriam Cates, Labour Mayor of West Yorkshire Tracy Brabin, former Boris Johnson advisor Git O'Harry and Naomi Smith of the pro-EU pressure group Best for Britain. On the programme today, former MP Boris Johnson goes for a run. The people of Uxbridge and South Ruislip and Selby and Ainsty will elect new MPs in the next few weeks. Rishi Sunak faces his other political opponent, Keir Starmer, in Prime Minister's questions at noon. We'll bring you that live.
If we want growth, if we want prosperity, if we want to remove that worry that families have about the increase in the weekly shop, the cost of living going up, then we have to tackle inflation.
Financial pain for homeowners as interest rates go up and mortgage deals are pulled.
There is one critical outcome that liberal individualism has completely failed to deliver, and that is babies.
Good girl. Well done.
Are Brits having too few babies, and why?
They're still insisting on an increase of 35%. I think for many of your viewers, that is out of step with what they themselves are receiving.
I've said to the junior doctors, I can't honestly say we'd be able to deliver a 35% pay increase overnight.
As they start their 3-day strike, will either party give them what they want? A junior doctor joins us in the studio. Let's start, though, with the financial pain in the headlines, starting with this in the eye. Mortgage misery set to be as bad as the 1980s, with interest rates heading for 5.75%. They're at 4.5% at the moment, but mortgage products are being pulled, and that will likely lead to higher mortgage payments for home owners, adding perhaps hundreds of pounds to those bills every year. So my opening question to the panel, starting with you, Miriam, are increasing mortgage rates, rising bills, a bigger problem for Rishi Sunak to solve, or his predecessor, the former Prime Minister, Boris Johnson?
Well, I think the cost of living is far more important to most people. Obviously, there's been a lot of political attention on Boris Johnson, but I don't think it's a significant issue for people in the country.
But what is it for Rishi Sunak? That was my question.
Well, again, I don't think it is a significant issue. Obviously, we've got these by-elections to fight, and the attention is rightly going to be on those and, the results of those. But I think, Boris Johnson has not been Prime Minister for over a year now. Of course, he still creates headlines, but I don't think in the Parliamentary Party it's much of a big deal, him standing down. Obviously, the by-elections, there will be focus on that. But I think the cost of living, mortgage rate rises, food rate rises are a huge issue. And, whilst initially this rate rise is going to hit homeowners hard, the Bank of England is increasing the rate in order to control inflation, and inflation affects everybody. So there's no easy outcome here. Central banks across the Western world are raising interest rates. Inflation is going up. This is the situation we're in. And it's a very difficult thing for the government to manage and the Bank of England.
What do you think is a bigger headache for the Prime Minister? His predecessor, Boris Johnson, or increasing mortgage rates?
Well, to be honest, Joe, I'm not really bothered about the psychodrama, which is the biggest headache, because what is really important is this interest rate rise, which is going to impact on homeowners and renters. And already hundreds of thousands of families are really worried about paying their bills, and also buy-to-let landlords are thinking about selling their property, which means it's going to be more expensive to rent. I think we need leadership from government. We need a fresh start, and that general election couldn't come soon enough because they've tanked the economy and they have no solution.
Now, Miriam Cates mentions the by-elections. We'll talk about them in a moment, one of them being the now former seat of Boris Johnson. That is a political headache for Rishi Sunak, but are the others right that actually it's mortgage rates?
Absolutely. I spent most of last year trying to put Partygate in perspective, saying that's not what matters to real people. The press were obsessed, the party was obsessed, talking about something that was neither here nor there. Mortgage rates really are. And if people go under and they lose their homes or they lose their businesses, that's a big deal. And the competent management of the economy, which we had until, this point last year, last July, things were in much better shape than they are now. was actually all going pretty well. And actually, what I'd say to this point is that if this plays to anyone's strengths, then Rishi Sunak, whether he should be there or not, but he is more capable of handling an economic crisis than most people in Britain. He's a decent economist. He worked for a global bank. He's got an MBA from one of the best universities in the world. This is what he does, and he beavers away. So I think it's a challenge for Keir Starmer.
Interest rates are going up, mortgages are going up, inflation isn't coming down.
We know why, but the question now is, who is best placed to bring it back down, to bring down inflation, to grow the economy? Somebody who, was in the prosecution service, who may have a claim to be good on crime, or somebody who is a global economist?
What do you think is a bigger headache?
Gitto, you are so wrong if you think Partygate didn't cut through. We focus group.
But does it matter?
We focus
does it matter?
group.
Like
of course it
mortgages?
matters. Of course it matters. My father died after 6 months of me not being able to touch him, while people in government were partying. If you think, and listen to the bereaved families that we had.
I lost my sister. I'm not going to parade that here. That is not a rational way of deciding whether we focus on the right things.
Let me speak. Partygate has cut through enormously, and if anyone says otherwise, they are completely wrong. But compounding that pain is not just these interest rate rises, where mortgages have gone up over £1,000 a month overnight for some families, where renters are struggling because their buy-to-let landlords are having to put up rents. It is also a decade or more, in fact 18 years now, of wage stagnation. The average weekly earnings today are the exact same as they were 18 years ago in November 2005. That is 18 years. That is an entire childhood come and gone of wages not changing, of an affordability crisis with weekly food bills going up. All of this is just compounding voters' views that this government, the Conservative government, has failed. It has failed them on so many fronts. And it is, as Tracy said, time for that to change.
Gitto, a brief response before we move on.
I think we've just got to cope with a global economic crisis prompted by the price of fuel, by war in Europe, by blowing £400 billion, allowing people to be at home. Well, we spent £400 billion that we've got very little show for now. It was very important at the time to protect people. But that's a ton of money that could have delivered a load of infrastructure, better sort of NHS, jobs across the UK. We've blown that.
Where does Liz Truss figure in your list of challenges to the economy?
It wasn't a glorious moment for anyone, was it? But the idea that because she messed up, that somehow we don't need an agenda for growth, that we don't need economic ambition, that we don't need to sort of lower the burden on people who try and generate wealth in this country is ludicrous. She tried to go too far too fast.
All right. Well, look, you mentioned you very briefly.
I think why a mortgage rate rise is such a big deal, because house prices are so overinflated already, they're unaffordable. And one of the reasons for that is that interest rates were so low for so long that people started investing in property rather than saving their money, rapidly increased the demand for property and therefore increased the price.
And you can't not talk about the lack of supply in that as well.
Before we move on,
but
before we move on to housing, just for the record, who has been in power since 2010 and could have presided over some of these big issues?
Well, I would suggest that our economic model has been broken since the early 80s, and we've had this cycle of interest rates, inflation, ever-growing debt,
and no responsibility from repeated Tory government.
I think all parties are responsible for that. But in 1980, household debt was 30% of GDP. It's now 85%. A lot of the growth since 1980 has come from debt. Householders are paying that price. And because property is now an asset, an investment, not a home, even if you do increase supply, you just increase the supply of an investment asset.
Would you be in favour of wealth taxes then, Miriam?
No, I'd be in favour of building new houses into a different system that are ring-fenced for young people.
All right, well, let's move on. You talked, the two of you, or discussed Partygate. We're still waiting for that report by a committee of MPs who were tasked into looking into whether the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson misled Parliament over breaches of COVID rules during lockdown. We don't know what's happened to it. Let's try and find out with the chief political correspondent for the BBC, Nick Eardley. Nick, where is it?
It is sitting on the desk of the Privileges Committee. My understanding is it's done, but they wanted to look over all of Boris Johnson's late-night submission from Monday night before they signed off on it. The latest talk, I've been over in Parliament this morning trying to find out, the expectation is firmly that we'll see it tomorrow, but we would have said the same thing yesterday.
I see. OK, well, we'll wait with bated breath. Writs moved for these 2 by-elections. When are they actually going to be?
I think they will be on the 20th of July. That'll probably take a couple of days to be confirmed because it's actually up to presiding officers as much as it is up to Parliament itself. The writ will be moved this afternoon for Boris Johnson's seat and Nigel Adams' seat as well. So they will happen in a few weeks' time. The more curious story, though, Joe, is what is going on with Nadine Dorries. She hasn't resigned yet. I think she's quite clearly enjoying keeping the whips waiting on it. It seems to me like there's a good chance that by-election could be a bit after the ones we're expecting on the 20th of July. And that just means that this pain for Rishi Sunak, some of the questions over what's going to happen in those votes and the possibility of the Conservatives losing what should be quite a safe blue wall seat, that's just going to rumble on for a bit longer.
Thank you very much, Nick Eardley. We'll see you later on, of course, after Prime Minister's questions. What do you think's going on, Gitto, in the case of Nadine Dorries?
In the case of Nadine Dorries, she is a best-selling author, and I think she enjoys, adding another twist to the plot. I've read a few of her novels, and people overlook this. She has been subject to more patronising, misogynist nonsense than almost anyone else I know. She's a great
Some of it from her own party.
Some of it from her own party, but my God, if you think that parties are united, unified churches where they all love each other, you know better than that.
I certainly do.
But I think she does enjoy inflicting a little bit of pain, throwing it back, as she would see it, on the pain inflicted on her.
What do you think Nadine Dorries should do? Former Cabinet Minister, big cheerleader for Boris Johnson. What should she do?
Well, she said she's going to resign. I can only assume she is going to. I mean, we can speculate on the reasons for the delay, but I think we just have to assume that she will resign and there will be a by-election. But I would just like to say that, of course, Nadine has come in for a whole load of criticism on both sides. But one thing she has done brilliantly is push forward the online safety bill, which I think still will be our flagship piece of child protection legislation.
Let's just go back briefly to the Privileges Committee of MPs. They were tasked to carry out this major piece of work into Boris Johnson. He resigned as a result of having sight of it. Did you think it was a kangaroo court like some of your colleagues and, in fact, like Boris Johnson?
Well, I've not obviously read the report, it's not published, and I am not going to be drawn into criticism of any individual members of the committee. However, I do think it's right to ask questions about the setup of the committee.
Why?
Because, there was a really interesting piece in The Telegraph at the weekend by Jeremy Breyer, KC, and he points out that the committee does have the same kind of powers as a court, and yet it doesn't operate amongst the same principles. So, for example, the judge, which in this case would be the chair, in a court would not be allowed to have any kind of apparent bias. Well, obviously, if you've got an
You're
opposition...
accusing Harriet Harman of bias,
I'm not.
the chair.
No, let me finish. I'm not. I'm saying if you are a Labour MP, you have apparent bias against a Conservative MP, as you would the other way around. That's just our political system.
Well, that's no conflict of interest if it was a
judge, that would absolutely recuse that judge.
But as you say, it's our system. Well, let Tracy
I'm
respond to
criticising the
that.
system then.
Because the committee is a majority of Conservative MPs. And, of course, all of the members of the committee have a political life before they come onto the committee. And then their recommendations would go to Parliament, which has a majority of Conservative MPs. It just feels like this is just classic Boris Johnson. He doesn't get the answer he wants, so he just says, well, everybody is against me. And talking to the people of West Yorkshire, they tell me exactly what they think about him, that he's a serial liar, he's a narcissist, and he's in it for himself.
That, of course, that's a separate issue, though, as to whether the committee is operating by judicial standards.
No, to actually challenge the committee is the lowest...
It's a democracy, we can challenge whatever we like.
The Trumpian approach to not getting the result that you want. So had it gone the other way, I would have put £100 on him not challenging their conclusions. So he is a man who won't take no for an answer, and he is throwing his toys out of the pram. And I think to actually name Harriet Harman in his rambling comments that he made over the weekend are actually quite dangerous as well.
Well, Miriam, are you implying that you won't actually back the conclusions? If it came to a vote, would you support the conclusions of that committee?
I don't know, because I haven't read the report, and I'm not...
So it depends on what they say?
Well, it depends. Of course it does. I'd be ridiculous to say I'm going to vote one way or another.
Depending on what they say in terms of whether they agree with what you think.
The point of the process is that Parliament gets a vote. There would be no point in Parliament having a vote and MPs having a vote if it was a foregone conclusion. The idea of it is we read the report and come to our own conclusion, and these votes are traditionally not whipped, so it will be up to individual MPs, and I'm not going to make any decision till I've read the report. But, Tracy may be right in everything she says about Boris Johnson. I'm not arguing with that. What I'm saying is we should be able to challenge the setup of the committee without criticising any individual members and say, if it is quasi-judicial, should it not be under the same standards as a court? The judge should have no perceived bias, shouldn't be able to meet in private with anybody involved in the case, and should have the same standards as a court. I think that's a reasonable question to ask.
What's Boris Johnson going to do next, Gitto?
I don't know, but I think that's a no-brainer. And if you put the boot on the other foot, I would defend Keir Starmer in not being content with a process that put his future livelihood at the mercy of, let's say, Dominic Raab or William Hague, because Harriet Harman is not some sort of above the political fray.
It's not just her, as we know.
Yes,
it was made up of a...
She was actually leader. It's a good pub quiz question. Name a woman who's been leader of the Labour Party. None has ever been elected, but briefly she presided as acting leader of the Labour Party, with the power to throw out a Conservative Prime Minister. That doesn't feel like a quasi-judicial
process. A majority of Conservatives, surely, if you want to make it party political, people will argue, particularly when...
This is a judicial issue. This is not about numbers in Parliament. This is not about whose side you're on. Right. This is meant to decide whether what was going on in somebody's head when they did something. That's meant to be above party politics. So whether it's Tories or Labour or votes on the floor,
so the system can't be trusted at all in terms of presiding over these issues.
Not for something with stakes that high.
Naomi?
It does all sound incredibly Trumpian. Tracy was right to use the word. And let's just remember what average people are thinking when they see this. Tracy used the word I do disagree with, psychodrama. It's not a Tory psychodrama, it's not a Tory soap opera, because psychodramas are really good fun and millions of people tune in to watch soap operas every day. The country is turning off of this. This is precisely what they don't want to see. And actually, Sunak's looking weaker and weaker on all of this. There was a briefing that potentially MPs were only going to get to vote on noting the committee's findings rather than whether or not they support it. That makes him look weak. And I tell you what, voters do not want a weak leader in this kind of affordability crisis that they find themselves in.
Let me just show our viewers and guests this headline in the Daily Express. Boris Johnson insists nothing less than absolute victory and total Brexit will do. Does that sound like the next leadership pitch for Boris Johnson, Miriam?
If it is, I don't think it'll be a successful one. I mean, obviously, Brexit is still an issue that we're talking about, but what does total Brexit mean?
What does it mean?
If Brexit is leaving the EU, we have achieved that. We are no longer.
Well, what does he mean then? Well, he doesn't think we have achieved total Brexit, and he presided over it.
What does he mean? And I can only speculate. Is he referring to using our Brexit freedoms more wisely? Is he referring to potential conflicts with European courts? I don't know. But in terms of, just from a practical point of view, have we achieved Brexit? Yes, we have. We're no longer a member of the EU.
I mean, would you support the idea of leaving the European Court or the European Convention, or are you disappointed with the EU retained law bill or parts of it being dropped? Is that what you think he is talking about?
Well, I think for most people who voted for Brexit, it was essentially about making sure that here in Britain, our borders, our money and our laws are controlled by Parliament. And if we have achieved that, then we've achieved Brexit. Now, there are clearly some grey areas about the ECHR. For example, we saw in the recent illegal migration bill, where I and a number of other Conservative MPs put forward an amendment that meant that the Home Secretary now has the power, or will have the power, to ignore these Section 35 notices that the European courts produced that, prevented the plane taking off to Rwanda, famously. Now,
would you like us to leave? Would you like us to leave? Would you like us to leave the European Convention on Human Rights?
If we get to a position where our law is not controlled by the UK Parliament because we find that we're in conflict, then yes. Right. But I don't think we're at that point, and I think there's plenty of mileage to go. And I don't think we should leave just for the sake of it, unless it's clearly in conflict with sovereignty.
What do you think it means, total Brexit?
Look, Johnson has gone from get Brexit done in 2019 to we got Brexit done in 2020 to celebrating 2 years of having got Brexit done in 2022 to now I'm the only one who can get Brexit done again in 2023. The disgraced emperor wears no clothes. And by that, I'm going to refer to a massive poll that West Britain published a couple of weeks ago. We did over 10,000 voters responded to the poll. 63% to 21. Brexit has created more problems than it solved. 53% 48% want closer ties with the EU, 14% only want a greater distance, 52% want us to be aligned with the EU on standards and workers' rights, only 35% preferring divergence. So the country has moved on from being a majority pro-Brexit in 2016 to knowing it's not worked to actually wanting a closer relationship with Europe. So whatever Johnson means, the country has moved on.
All right, let's just quickly go into the Commons because they're reading the writs. Lindsay Hoyle, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, they're the Speaker in Parliament. You can see him standing there. Only a few MPs in the House at the moment, but this is a procedure that is done ahead of what we call writs being issued so that the by-elections or the starting guns on the campaigns for those by-elections can actually begin. And they're probably going to be towards the end of July, possibly, as Parliament goes into recess. That's what's going on at the moment. Let's go back to the idea of Brexit. You didn't agree with Boris Johnson over Brexit. Let me just show you this YouGov poll. Carrying on from what Naomi was saying, the number of Britons saying the UK was right to vote for Brexit has fallen to its lowest level to date, 31%. The 56% who say leaving the EU was the wrong call is the joint highest recorded so far. You thought he was wrong then. You still think he's wrong now?
I've never changed my mind. I thought it was an act of self-harm for the UK. And it gives me no comfort, though, because that doesn't make me feel great. We can go, bag in hand and sort of crawl our way back in. It just makes it depressing for me. So we have to make Brexit work. And the problem at the moment is
did he fail to do that, Boris Johnson?
Well, we've essentially... we've got divorced, but we're still sleeping in the spare bedroom, poorer and less influential than we used to be within the family. That's where we've ended up. Now, Boris does have a vision for Brexit. I don't particularly like it, but at least I see that there's a journey where we take advantage of the freedoms that we have to do things differently. At the moment, we're doing exactly the same with this kind of symbolic comfort, supposedly, that at least it's us choosing to sort of let in loads more immigrants than ever before. At least it's us that are choosing to have all these high taxes and regulation. That gives me no comfort at all. That's not a vision for anyone, and I'm not surprised the polls are starting to turn.
Miriam?
Well, there's a lot to unpack there. I'd love to have a longer discussion about this. I suppose two key points that I'd pull out is, one, that Brexit has been conflated with all the other economic issues that have faced the whole of the Western world over the last few years, the pandemic.
But Brexit's made it worse.
Well, I would dispute that. I don't think that's
true. The London School of Economics says Brexit alone added £250 to the average food bill.
Well, and certainly, Miriam,
let Tracy throw it in, then you can come back.
Just as a Yorkshire MP and as West Yorkshire Mayor, I just want to know what businesses are saying to you about the impact of Brexit, because what they're saying to me is that this has been, for some businesses, absolutely catastrophic.
Well, businesses are talking to me about energy prices, and I think that is common across the UK. But I think, go back to the earlier point, we were in the EU for 40 years. We have got divorced, as you say, but there's a long way to go before we're separate and flourishing. I would completely admit that. I think some of the economic problems we're facing have been conflated with Brexit when they're actually not that's not true. But I completely take your point. We should be taking advantage, for example, of control over VAT. We should be raising the VAT threshold so that, people with small businesses can expand rather than facing this massive cliff edge at £80,000 turnover, which is a tiny amount now compared to what it was. So, yes, I do. I agree with that.
Should Labour be a more pro-single market party now? Should they be much more forthright in terms of embracing the European Union, if not rejoining?
Well, certainly, as I was saying, that we're looking at real challenges for businesses when it comes to exports. And I think there is the review in 2026. And there is the opportunity to have serious people around the table, because this is not working. And when you talk about, total Brexit, well, it's total chaos. We've not seen the leadership. We were promised more money for the NHS. We were promised those glorious uplands.
But you want to make Brexit, but you want to make Brexit work too.
Absolutely do, and there is no going back to the referendum.
Should there be?
I've got good news for you all. Leicester Britain has been doing a lot of work on this. We did the most comprehensive consultation of business post-Brexit. We published 114 recommendations 2 weeks ago that any party can put in their manifestos or the government could implement pretty much immediately. And that's based on recommendations from businesses that are just saying to us, this is what needs to happen, whether it is things like an independent board of trade, whether it is saying we will align with the EU by default on standards, and then where we need to diverge, we'll have a proper OBR-style mechanism through this board of trade that would oversee it. It's jam-packed with practical recommendations, so I commend it to you all. And we're holding Trade Unlocked in Birmingham at the NEC next week with hundreds more businesses coming together to focus on solutions. So
it's a great proposal, but would you like Labour to be more muscular in its support of the EU?
But certainly Labour mayors are being more muscular, that we are having interventions that support our businesses.
So you're not in line with the leadership on this?
No,
you're doing your own thing?
Absolutely in line with the leadership, that we have to make the best of what we've got, and we've got the powers and the money to some degree to help business.
And the Shadow Foreign Secretary yesterday made a big thing about having to work more closely with the EU. So, yes, there is a review coming up in 2026. The EU has been at pains to say that is a review of the implementation of the Windsor Framework as well as the TCA. It isn't a renegotiation. But, you know, things can change. And as and when the atmospherics among different parties change, then maybe that could happen. But I tell you what, businesses do need to cut that Brexit red tape. Tracy's dead right. They are hurting across the country, and energy costs are compounding it. But you cannot say that it is just energy costs or just business rates.
Well, let me get your response to the Daily Telegraph headline, because you know we've covered it this week extensively about the opening of the COVID inquiry, or the public hearings. Brexit hindered pandemic response, COVID inquiry told. Yes, that was Hugo Keith KC, who says that the UK's departure from the EU did indeed hinder the pandemic response, because they're looking at the preparedness. He said all the activity, time and focus was spent on departing from the EU and not actually dealing with the pandemic. What do you make of that?
Well, I would dispute that. I mean, I think the vaccine rollout was a clear example of how being out of the EU actually helped us. And, you know, I'm sure there's many more facts and figures to come out. And, you know, perhaps there was an element of distraction, but I don't think that's clear cut. But I think, you know, as we're talking about Brexit, all these issues are important. Of course they are, and they need working through. But we have to come back to the reason that people voted for Brexit. They felt that they were being ruled by people who didn't know what their concerns were. They were lacking cultural and economic security, and they wanted a change. They wanted to bring back government to this country, to bring back control of our money, our borders and our laws. That demand hasn't gone away. That's not to say it's been handled perfectly, but there's still a demand for that kind of national sovereignty, this idea of being a country that is in charge of itself, and people still face that insecurity, and I think we mustn't diminish.
They don't feel more in control. There are no voters that say, I now feel like I have more control over my life than before the vote in 2016. So whatever their reasons for voting for it, and take back control was the headline slogan of that campaign, people don't feel more in control of their affordability, you know, their spending, their weekly shop, their ability to...
But do you think it's realistic, having been, let's use the marriage analogy, having been part of this marriage for 40 years, do you think it's realistic that we're suddenly going to feel this enormous psychological and economic change relatively close to the event? Or do you think it's going to take
tomorrow?
years?
It's always just one last heave, a little bit longer. Just wait, guys,
again,
just wait. It's a nonsense.
But again, this is just focusing on the economic issues rather than the cultural issues that are just as important.
Well, we're going to come on to one, Culture. Do you want to say something?
I just want to say this is an argument for further and deeper devolution. Because if you want people to have more agency over their destiny,
I want to say one thing. I want to say one thing. There are millions and millions of people out there, myself included, who would have happily voted Labour or anything else if a party was offering a coherent, persuasive proposal for not leaving the EU. And the tragedy about Keir Starmer is, while he was part of the shadow cabinet of Jeremy Corbyn, he could not persuade Jeremy Corbyn to adopt the policy. How on earth can Keir Starmer be the man who represents Britain on the global stage, where he's outmanoeuvred by Jeremy Corbyn over something that is meant to be as important to him as it is to people like me over Brexit?
You could have voted Lib Dem.
The two mainstream parties, as you know, and you and the Labour Party now go on as if somehow you were not complicit in this, and yet at the same time you kind of were, because you're scared of the voters that deserted you.
We're not scared of the voters. We're listening to
the tragedy is Keir Starmer could have stopped Brexit happening. He wasn't persuasive enough, not only with the general public, but even within a shadow cabinet under Jeremy Corbyn.
Well, let me talk about advisers. Why couldn't you persuade Boris Johnson to do something different as a very close advisor and friend? Wasn't it something that you could have put him off if you felt so strongly about it.
So if you listen to chapter 5 of my podcast series,
no, we're not doing promotions.
I basically deal with that. I wasn't an advisor for him at the time. I was on holiday. I rang him. I tried to persuade him, but I basically had about 5 minutes and the press were already outside his house.
So you think you might have succeeded if you'd had
well,
longer?
if I'd still be there, who knows?
You didn't answer my
That's a
question, though,
part
earlier. What do you think he is going to do next, or what should he do next?
I know that he's beavering away on his biography, and it's going to be a masterpiece. It's going to be War and Peace in so many ways.
You've earned that gong, haven't you?
And he's writing away.
Or do you think it was a bit low of him to blame advisors for not giving him the right advice when it came to COVID rules? That's his defence, isn't it, broadly speaking?
Do you know what? I think the police looked into this with the training that they have, with the experience that they have, with the due process that they have, and with the perspective that they have, which is clinical. They found him at fault on one occasion, on a technicality, and they fined him 50 quid. That should have been the end of it. Sue Gray, then, the woman who's now been cleared to go and be Chief of Staff to whom? Oh, Keir Starmer.
Yeah, but hang on. You're not answering my question, which is, should you blame advisors for not giving you the advice that he felt he should have had, or that he was told by them, which would have prevented him breaking
Her
rules?
inquiry did the opposite. Her inquiry did the opposite. She attributed the behaviour of mature, free-thinking, supposedly clever individuals in their 20s working at the heart of government. They were not culpable. It was all a failure of leadership. Now, I have this old-fashioned view that we have moral agency. So it's not Boris's fault if I'm drunk or if I'm rude to a member of staff or if I trash the swing. It's my fault.
Yeah, and is it advisor's fault if he doesn't know his own rules?
Well, if he has... Do you know what? It's a big building.
All right.
We don't know what's going on over there at the moment, do we?
All right, well, let's move on. Let's talk about birth rates and babies. Let's listen to Miriam Cates at the National Conservative Conference. I think it was last month.
There are currently around 4 working-age people for every pensioner in the UK. But based on current projections, in just 20 years' time, there will be fewer than 3 working-age people for every pensioner. And a low birth rate is not just a problem in itself, it's also a symptom of serious societal malaise. But having a home and a secure job and support from your family, community and nation are not the only preconditions to starting a family. You must also have hope for the future. And that hope is sadly diminishing in so many of our young people today. Because liberal individualism has proven to be completely powerless to resist the cultural Marxism that is systematically destroying our children's souls.
Just before we get on to those terms that you used, Miriam, let's show everybody this graph. The total fertility rate for England and Wales, you can see there a long period of time, but it has gone down, certainly up to 2021. Women would need to have, on average, 2.08 children to ensure long-term replacement of the population. At the moment, I think it's about 1.55 or 1.56. Why are you blaming liberal individualism? What's liberal individualism in your mind?
Well, I think the whole speech was 22 minutes, so I think most of the speech was talking about the kind of economics, the setup that we have that is forcing people to delay or not have children. So whether that's high house prices, high taxes. But then I went on to say that you don't just need those kind of economic material factors, you also need hope for the future, because having children is basically saying, I love where I live, I'm proud of my community, I feel like I want to bring a child into this nation.
And liberal individualism.
And so the setup, the kind of... Again, it's very difficult to unpack in a short space of time, but this setup that we have that basically is about you as an individual, whether that's being taxed as an individual, educated as an individual, breaking down the bonds that keep us together, that has traditionally held us together between family, community and nation, isolating people has actually made it much more difficult to have that hope and that wider support in order to bring children into the world.
Do you agree, Tracy?
Well, I think... if you want more babies, you have got to have a healthy economy. And I think certainly talking about hope is quite extraordinary after what we've seen over the last 13 years, where actually the economy has been trashed. And so that families, young people who are looking at the future with 0-hour contracts, with high rents, with a massive debt from college, where parental leave is poor, where leadership isn't tackling the climate emergency, where the future does look pretty grim. But I think there is an opportunity to reverse that with leadership that understands that you need a buoyant economy to have a higher birth rate.
Well, what you say makes sense, and I think that the assumption that most people make is, oh, people aren't having children because they can't afford to have children. Now, that is certainly a factor. But if you go to other countries, let's say Finland, which has much more generous maternity leave than us, free childcare, full-time childcare, from the age of 10 months. No, let me finish. Excellent education, higher pay on average, and no housing crisis. They have one of the lowest birth rates in the entire world at 1.3. Economics is not the only factor. It absolutely plays into it. I'm not denying that at all. I'm saying there is more to it than just pure economics. It is part of culture and community and people's sense of hope. And we need to look at all of it. And I agree, we need leadership on it, absolutely.
So Miriam, Pregnant Then Screwed, you'll know the campaign group led by the brilliant Jolie Brealey. They did a survey of 27,000 women, and 76% of them said that the reason why they're not having children is the cost of childcare. And it is really important when we've got rising house prices, the government can't get a grip of interest rates. And how is a couple going to think, oh, it's economically viable for me to have a family when it's looking at, £15,000 a year in childcare costs alone?
As I said, of course, a functioning childcare system is important. But what I'm saying is, if you look around the world, there is not a direct relationship between the amount that the state or anybody spends on childcare and education, those things, and the decision to have children. Because, as I said in my speech, having children is essentially a biological process. And just like any other biological process, there are so many factors to give you the kind of optimum conditions. And yes, economics are one, but they're absolutely not the only one. And I think one of the things that has happened kind of without thinking is that people now think that in your 30s is the kind of normal time to have children. And in fact, last year, for the first time ever, the average 30-year-old woman got to 30 without having a child. That's the first time it's ever happened. But biologically, you're most fertile between 16 and 25. And if you leave it to your 30s, sadly, an enormous number of women won't end up having a child, even though they want to. So this is a political, economic and social problem.
IVF could be cheaper.
Well, I'm afraid IVF is massively oversold. The success rate of IVF is incredibly low, and it always will be. Of course it should be there and it should be funded and all those things, but it's not an answer to fertility.
Why are we having fewer babies, and what can be done about it?
Well, globally, fertility tracks food prices.
I would dispute that. There's only 3% of people in the whole world that are now living in countries where birth rates aren't falling.
And there is inflation across the world, acutely here in the UK at the moment. When I look at my staff, I employ a lot of people in their 20s and early 30s, and they are all in a situation where they believe that the social contract has been broken. They have no stake. They don't think they will ever have capital. So the whole capitalism ideology for them is something that they begin to then question. It isn't about liberal individualism. I think it's about market fundamentalism having failed that generation. They're not going to own a home. They are going to have to pick up the cost of the NHS. That may not be available to them in the way it has been to their parents and grandparents as they get older. Their rents are exorbitant and their wages are stagnating. So this is an entire generation who are quite rightly wanting to be responsible parents if they choose to be parents, but knowing that it would be irresponsible to do so when they cannot afford to pay their own rent some months, let alone look after a child and its significant cost that bringing a child into the world brings.
Interesting. Do you agree with what is being said in terms of not having a stake anymore in the capitalist model that exists, or do you lean towards also cultural, social reasons for us having fewer kids?
Why don't we have a home-owning democracy?
I always take the idea that everything is down to economics. Clearly, economics is paramount, and driving the economy would be a big contribution to making people feel better placed to sort of start a family. That's a no-brainer. But there are other considerations too, and one of the issues we have at the moment, a lot of people don't want to work. They don't want to go into work. They don't want to go into the office. They don't think that they need to look after themselves. They want the state to look after them. You can't bring a child into the world until you're a grown-up yourself. We all go through it. It's hard, even when
some people do, though, don't they?
But one narrow point on the sort of cost of childcare, one of the reasons that's high is because it's so strictly regulated, because the proportions of care workers to children is so rigid and high that if you could deregulate a little bit, you'd have cheaper childcare and the market could deliver more options for people that would allow more people to go back into work and grow the economy.
That's
and you
not
create
the
a benign
answer. That's
circle.
not the answer, because that would ruin
It
quality.
could be part of
it
the...
would ruin quality
So
of
you
teaching.
say always protecting the vested interest rather than thinking about the people you want to vote for.
What's the vested interest? The children are our future, and it's important they get a high-quality childcare.
Well, they're not going to get childcare at all if it's beyond the reach of their parents. One of the parents is going to end up staying at home and not fulfilling his or her own potential because farming out the childcare to someone else is just not doable for them. So it's all linked.
Miriam?
Well, first of all, the idea that we have the most expensive childcare in the world or the West is an urban myth. Our childcare is the most expensive as a proportion of families' net income in this country, but it's very comparable as a kind of basic cost to many other countries. I don't think we can make it cheaper, or not significantly. We've got a choice over who funds it, absolutely, but I don't think we can drive down the price. The issue is that families' net income in this country is so low because of the way we're taxed, which means that families pay 20, 30, 40% more than they do in comparable European countries. That's a separate issue. But on the childcare issue, you know, of course, most women want to mix and match work and home. Most fathers do too. But the polling is very clear that for very young children, under 3s, under 2s particularly, most women of children that age want to work less but feel they don't have a choice. So I would prefer a much more flexible system where the help that the state provides is in more vouchers or tokens or tax reductions so that people can choose.
Or either parent could say and use it.
So they can choose how to use it. And actually, I think that is far more pro-family because, you know, some people, of course, want to have a baby and get back to work as quick as possible. But most people are not like that. They want to care for their own child. We're not allowing them to do that. We need to have a much more flexible system that's pro-family.
Tracy, are you disappointed to some extent that the proposals, we didn't get full detail from Labour, are going to limit it, to means test the childcare support that families would get, as opposed to it being universal?
Well, certainly the threshold was £100,000. So if there's an opportunity where you can make it fair, obviously, universality makes it simpler to roll out, but I think what's important is the quality of the childcare and for those people that need it. But if I could just ask Miriam just about the choice of cultural Marxism, and it sounds fantastic, you know, wanting more family time and women to be able to have more children and so on. But why did you choose that phrase that could be so offensive to people?
Well, firstly, I wasn't saying that was the cause of low birth rates, and you know that has been widely misreported. As I said, the majority of my speech was talking about these economic factors.
But you did use that phrase.
Yeah. Let me come on to that. But I wasn't saying that those factors were causing low birth rate. I was saying they were contributing to a lack of hope in our current generation of young people.
What does it mean?
So cultural Marxism in centre-right circles is a kind of catch-all phrase for the kind of critical social justice theories. So whether that's critical race theory, gender ideology, those kind of things that, you know, myself and many others in Parliament have been campaigning against being taught in schools and universities. There's strong evidence to suggest. Now, I understand that in some corners of the internet that it has some sort of conspiracy theory connotations. I wasn't aware of that. As I said, that's not how it is used in many centre-right academic papers and journalists.
Even in the way you are using it, what's your issue with that, Tracy?
Well, it certainly is offensive to Jewish people who we know that there is that sense around the country with far-right leaders that there are sections of society that the birth rate is rising faster than us, therefore we should be worried about that because we are going to be
I don't ascribe to that at all. And
where Viktor Orban is paying women to have children to offset that
I do not ascribe to that at all. And, you know, just last night I was at the 75th anniversary celebrations of Israel as an independent country, hosted by the Israeli embassy. This conference was hosted by an Israeli Jewish philosopher. You know, I am not going to ascribe to any of that, but it is a useful term.
Yeah, but what I meant was the term in the way
circles.
you are using it. I mean, one of the other options, of course, is higher levels of immigration. Higher levels of immigration could lead to a higher birth rate. Would you be in favour of that, Miriam?
Well, I don't think it is the answer because the evidence suggests that after 1 or 2 generations, it potentially increased birth rates amongst immigrant communities actually just aligns to the rest of the
All right,
nation.
well, let me bring the others in, because Prime Minister's question is coming up in a few minutes' time. What about that?
Well, I just don't think you can have it both ways. You've got one of the lowest rates of unemployment in the country at the moment, and yet businesses are struggling with one of the highest numbers of vacancies they've had for a long time. You have to either import labour to be able to fill some of that, and these are very critical jobs in the NHS sometimes, and very important jobs in care, in social care, in childcare, or you have to have a growing population, and at the moment we've got a government that's trying to pursue neither.
Right, we have actually got high levels, of course, of net migration at the moment, but as you say, it's deciding who's going to make those decisions. But immigration as a response, if you like, to having more children.
I'm very unfashionable. I've been out of sync with Tony Blair's Labour Party and the current Conservative Party, because I think immigration is one of the best things about Britain. It brings a wealth of talent, it brings a diversity of people, most of them more entrepreneurial, more highly skilled, more driven than a whole load of, frankly, homegrown people. And so I would like a bit more honesty about how the NHS would collapse without immigrants, how the economy would not be remotely as dynamic, and how if we had more immigrants in here, properly catered for, unleashed rather than forced to do terrible jobs when they're capable engineers or dentists or whatever, we could solve a lot of problems. But we're stuck in this warp. And I'm afraid that if there was a truly progressive party offering an alternative view at the moment, it would not be playing the Me Too, but a little bit less so, that Keir Starmer's.
Well, let me put the first one there to Miriam. Do you agree? Gitto's right.
No, I don't agree. I don't think immigration is the answer. Of course, if you have the barriers to entry too low, businesses are going to import people from abroad rather than investing in their own workforce or in technology. But going back to the use of immigration to fill the birth rate gap we've got, it's not going to work, because immigrants get old too, and then you just have to import more immigrants. What you need is a good ratio of babies, essentially, to 50-year-olds. So when the 50-year-olds get old, the babies can...
well, let me ask Tracy then on...
we need to realise what an important issue this is, because if we go from 4 working people to 1 pensioner to 3, that is economic catastrophe.
Well, and we are discussing it more and more. In terms of levels of immigration, Gitto said there should be a more honest debate about it. Is it time to scrap targets and numbers and just have the numbers of people that perhaps the country needs? I think you haven't got time to answer the question.
Oh, no, I was about to.
Let's go.
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I know the whole House will want to thank the emergency services for their ongoing response to the shocking incident in Nottingham yesterday. Our thoughts are with those injured and with the families of those who lost their lives. Today is also the 6th anniversary of the Grenfell Tower fire. We remember the 72 people who lost their lives and remain as committed as ever to ensuring that such a tragedy can never happen again. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Lynn Brown.
Grateful, Mr. Speaker. Can I associate myself with the words of the Prime Minister? Our hearts are with the City of Nottingham, and we also remember those 72 killed at Grenfell and support those still fighting for justice and safe homes. According to the Office of National Statistics, in January, food prices were rising at 16.8% a year. The most recent figures show food prices rising by a whopping 19.1%, making a mockery of his pledge to halve inflation. Does he honestly think people won't notice?
Mr. Speaker, of course, I acknowledge that the cost of living is rising for families, and that's why my first priority at the beginning of the year is to halve inflation. I'm pleased to say that inflation is now falling, and in the latest set of estimates, we remain on track to do so. With regard to food prices, we're not alone in experiencing high food price inflation like many other countries in Europe. That's why the Chancellor has already spoken to the CMA, who are looking at the grocery industry, and we continue to support families with the cost of living, notably by paying half of their energy bills.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's a fact that Labour have never left government with unemployment lower than when they came in. And figures released yesterday show that there are now 4 million more people in work than when Labour were last in power. Does the Prime Minister agree that the security of a good job will always be better than Labour's dependency culture?
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is absolutely right to point out Labour's poor record on jobs. And yesterday's figures showed that the UK economy is resilient, with the number of people in employment now at a record level, Mr. Speaker. By no means complacent, but the inactivity rate continues to fall and the unemployment rate remains at historically low levels. That is a Conservative government delivering for our country.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
I join with the Prime Minister in his comments about the terrible attack in Nottingham yesterday and in tribute to the work of our emergency services. The thoughts of the whole House are with the victims and the people of that great city. I also join him in remembering the 72 people who lost their lives in the Grenfell Tower fire. The victims and their families are always in our hearts, but 6 years on, the justice they're fighting for is long overdue. Mr. Speaker, all across the country, people are worried about their bills, the price of the weekly shop and the spiralling mortgage rates. So why has the Tory party spent this last week arguing over which of them gets a peerage?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, my points on this are very clear. In line with a long-established convention of previous Prime Ministers having the ability to submit honours, I followed the process to the letter in convention with long-standing process. It is, by the way, Mr. Speaker, a long-standing convention that Prime Ministers on both sides of this House have followed in the same way that I did.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, the truth is, for all his tough talk after the event, the Prime Minister did sign off the honours list. And that means, Mr. Speaker, that those who threw a Downing Street party the night before the late Queen sat alone at her husband's funeral will now receive awards from the King. If he's so tough, why didn't you block it?
Mr. Speaker, as I said, I and the government follow due process and convention. Prime Ministers of both parties have always upheld the convention of non-interference on political honours. My predecessors may not have agreed with Labour's choices of Tom Watson or Shami Chakrabarti, but the same precedent, Mr. Speaker, the same precedent stood then as it does now, and I'd expect a knight like him to understand that.
I think we will have more if we carry on. It'll be more outside rather than here. Keir Starmer.
Honour should be for public service, not Tory cronies. Mr. Speaker, isn't this the case? He was too weak to block Johnson's list. And that also means that those who spent their time helping cover up Johnson's law-breaking are rewarded by becoming lawmakers for the rest of their lives. Is his message to the British public, if you don't like it, tough?
Mr. Speaker, it's right that we use the honours system to recognise people, almost 2,000 people a year, from members of the England Lionesses team to the first Asian police officer in Greater Manchester. But he talks about putting people in the House of Lords. Perhaps he could explain why he put forward for a peerage the former MP, Labour MP Tom Watson, who spread vicious conspiracy theories that were totally and utterly untrue, damaged public discourse and inflicted misery on innocent people.
Quiet. Can I just say to the Prime Minister, you shouldn't criticise other members. Also, you're not responsible for the other parties. You are the Prime Minister that's answering the questions, not asking the questions. Here's some. Order. Is somebody wanting to challenge my decision? Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, the truth is the country is paying the price of this endless cycle of chaos and distraction. The Tory economic crash means that millions of mortgage holders will pay thousands of pounds more next year, and the blame lies squarely at the door of a government more focused on the internal wars of the Tory party than the needs of the country. does he not think that those responsible should hang their heads in shame?
Mr. Speaker, as I said right at the beginning of the session, our #1 economic priority is to reduce inflation so that we can restrain the increase in interest rates. But one thing we know that we need to do that is to reduce our borrowing and debt, Mr. Speaker. That's how we will bring interest and mortgage rates down. But last week, what did we see? Labour confusion with the Shadow Chancellor attempting to water down their plans to borrow £28 billion more a year. But she was promptly overruled by the Shadow Energy Secretary, the former leader, who said that they were 100% not abandoning their pledge. It really looks like Labour's offer never changes. It's uncontrolled borrowing and more chaos with Ed Miliband.
There's only one party. There's only one party that broke the economy. They're sitting right there. And there's a reason. There's a reason they can't fix the problems facing the country, because they never take responsibility for the damage that they've done. And it's not just Johnson. The Prime Minister's immediate predecessor is hoping to reward those who made her reign such a rip-roaring success. On her honours list are the masterminds of that kamikaze budget, the economic extremists of the Institute of Economic Affairs, those whose disastrous ideas crashed the economy and left the country to pick up the pieces. Will the Prime Minister block that honours list, or will he buckle to her as well?
Mr. Speaker, if you want disastrous economic ideas, all you have to do is Labour's economic policy on energy. I mean, it's an energy policy that seeks to ban all new British oil and gas drilling, Mr. Speaker, jeopardising 200,000 jobs and our energy security at a time of international conflict. Despots like Putin are the only people who will welcome such a policy. Okay, his predecessor once said that he wanted British jobs for British workers. His policy is British jobs for Russian workers.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, if he spent as much time focused on the economy, the NHS and the asylum system as he does haggling with his predecessors about who gets honours, the country would be in a far better state. But once again, he's lost control, and once again, it's working people paying the price. And if he disagrees with that, why not put it to the test? End the boasting, the excuses, the Tory chaos. See if he can finally find somebody, anybody, anywhere to vote for him, and call a general election now.
Mr. Speaker, he talked about asylum just this week. It was the Labour Party that voted against plans to tackle illegal migration. Just this week, it was the Labour Party that voted against plans to tackle disruptive protesters by their funding eco-zealots, Mr. Speaker. But we're getting on and delivering for the country. We're delivering record employment and the fastest wage growth in years, Mr. Speaker. It's clear only the Conservatives are going to deliver for the people of Britain.
Mr. Speaker, crime is down significantly and falling. Police officer numbers are at an all-time high. But the police funding formula remains elderly and out of date and penalises counties like my own of Hampshire to the tune of many millions of pounds. Previous administrations have made the commitment that a new police funding formula would be in place by the general election. Can I invite the Prime Minister to make the same commitment, please?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, recognise that the current police funding formula no longer accurately reflects demands on policing, and that is why the review is carefully considering local factors for each police force. Our priority is to deliver a robust, future-proof funding formula, but it is important that we take the time to get that right, and I know that the Home Office will continue to keep the House updated on our progress.
We now come to the Leader of the SNP, Stephen Flynn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would just like to echo the sentiments of the Prime Minister and indeed the Leader of the Opposition in relation to the terrible incident in Nottingham, and indeed our thoughts are with all of those still reeling from the tragedy at Grenfell all these years later. Mr. Speaker, during his ill-fated leadership bid late last summer, the Prime Minister warned of the perils of mortgage rate rises. Indeed, he stated, and I quote, "It's going to tip millions of people into misery, and it's going to mean we have absolutely no chance of winning the next election. Given that mortgage rates continue to rise, does he still agree with his own electoral analysis?
Mr. Speaker, which is absolutely why our economic policy sets as our #1 priority to reduce inflation and thereby bring interest rates, which, by the way, Mr. Speaker, have also risen in pretty much every developed economy around the world, more so in places like America and New Zealand, similar in other countries as well, like Australia. But it is important, in order to reduce inflation, that you do need to have control over borrowing, Mr. Speaker, which is why we, unlike the party opposite, are disciplined with regard to the public finances. But these are the issues that we should be focused on. I saw that the SNP yesterday, Mr. Speaker, had a meeting to discuss their future, but the only thing they managed to decide was that they should send Nicola Sturgeon some flowers. So can he tell us, did he sign the card?
Stephen Flynn.
Mr. Speaker, respectfully, I think the Prime Minister needs to grow up. There is an elephant in this here chamber when it comes to the dire economic circumstances facing the UK, and that's Brexit. The Tory benches, they don't want to accept it, and the Labour Party, they don't want to talk about it. But whether it's food prices, energy prices, or indeed mortgage prices, households in Scotland are being shafted by Brexit. So can I ask the Prime Minister, will he apologise for the cycle of misery that Westminster has caused?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, while his party leader calls Nicola Sturgeon the most impressive politician in Europe, we are getting on delivering for the people of Scotland, Mr. Speaker, paying half of their energy bills, making sure that pensions rise, making sure that there's direct support for those who need it with the cost of living, and crucially, ensuring that we secure over 200,000 jobs by supporting Scotland's North Sea oil and gas industry, something opposed by his party.
Carl McCartney.
Good afternoon, Speaker. Lincoln will soon benefit from £20 million worth of levelling up funding to deliver a traffic bridge over the railway to stop the city being permanently gridlocked by the Labour City Council's huge Western Growth Corridor housing development. This is truly levelling up for areas of the north in action. Will my right honourable friend affirm his commitment to my Lincoln constituents and businesses that he and his government will continue to help level up Lincoln and other areas in the north of our great country?
My honourable friend is a fantastic advocate for his constituents. I'm glad that he and Lincoln City Council were successful in their £20 million levelling up fund bid. The scheme will see 2 new bridges built across the railway line, improving access, reducing congestion. I very much look forward to seeing these plans progress, and he and I both share an ambition to make sure that we level up not just in Lincoln but across the country.
Neil Hanby.
Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition recently ventured out of London, visiting my constituency, to deliver a one-nation British Labour vision of Scotland. However, he neglected to mention that he intends to continue London's plunder of Scotland's vast energy wealth, just like the Tories, continuing the economic vandalism of Brexit, just like the Tories, and deny Scotland's right to self-determination, just like the Tories. So perhaps the Prime Minister can tell me which London party leader is the greatest threat to Scottish democracy, the Tory to my right or the Tory to my left?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I apologise because I didn't hear fully the honourable gentleman's question, but I did. From what I could gather, I think he probably agrees with me that the Leader of the Opposition is not the right person to lead our country.
Theresa Villiers.
Really worried about the cost of living. Will the Prime Minister agree that it is completely wrong for Labour to be introducing new ULEZ driving
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend is absolutely right to raise this important issue. While we are getting on providing significant support to families with the cost of living, the Labour Mayor of London, to whom Transport has devolved, is busily putting it up, imposing the ULEZ charge against the overwhelming views of residents and businesses. It is disappointing he is not listening to the British public and the public in outer London, but what's even more, his plan to raise costs on working families is totally backed by the Leader of the Opposition.
Kim Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Prime Minister, new data from the End Child Poverty Coalition and Loughborough University has shown that your government's austerity measures have plunged 4 to 4.2 million children into poverty, 70% of them in working households. In Liverpool, Riverside, 42% are living in poverty, up 7% since 2015. So can the Prime Minister commit to scrapping the cruel and ineffectual two-child limit to lift 250,000 children out of poverty and meet with anti-poverty organisations?
Mr. Speaker, I'd just like to gently point out to the Honourable Lady that there are, in fact, 400,000 fewer children in absolute poverty than in 2010. And we also know, Mr. Speaker, that work is the best route out of poverty for families. So with employment, as we saw yesterday, at record levels, I'm pleased that there are now over 600,000 fewer children in workless households in 2010. On the specific policy that she raises, it actually ensures fairness, Mr. Speaker, by asking families on benefits to make the same financial decisions as families supporting themselves solely through work.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, earlier this week, the all-party group on coalfield communities published our report into next steps in levelling up the former coalfield communities, which I know the Prime Minister has received a copy of his inbox. As a proud MP for Newcastle-under-Lyme, I'm delighted with the funding that we've had from government through the Future High Streets Fund and the Town Deal, but there's always more to do. So will the Prime Minister commit to reading our report, carefully considering our recommendations and working out what more we can do to level up our coalfield communities across the whole of the United Kingdom?
Prime Minister. Well, Mr. Speaker, I very much welcome the work of the APPG for coalfield communities and indeed the breadth and ambition of their policy contributions. We are committed to levelling up the UK by spreading opportunity more equally across the country, investing in and empowering places that need it the most, and including coalfield communities. And I look forward to discussing and hearing from the honourable gentleman further.
Wendy Chamberlain.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My vulnerable constituent, whose finances are held in trust, was wrongly billed £4,000 by two energy companies that now no longer exist as a result of the energy market crisis. Energy is one of the most basic services, and there is no Charter of Rights for consumers. We still don't have this resolved. Does the Prime Minister agree that we need such a charter?
Mr. Speaker, I'll happily ensure that the appropriate minister writes the Honourable Lady with a specific response on her constituents so we can try and resolve that issue.
Gary Sambrook.
Mr. Speaker. Recently, the Independent Regulator for Social Housing issued a notice against Birmingham City Council for the state of its social housing, with 23,000 homes not meeting the Decent Home Standard, over 17,000 homes not receiving asbestos checks, over 15,000 houses not having electrical safety checks, and over 1,000 homes not having fire risk assessments. Rather refreshingly and honestly and astonishingly, a leaked Labour memo put the blame for this at the heart of the Labour group in Birmingham. And so, does the Prime Minister agree with me, Mr. Speaker, that it's time that we have serious intervention in Birmingham to make sure that people can have decent homes to live in?
Mr. Speaker, the failings identified in Birmingham are wholly unacceptable. The Regulator for Social Housing has made clear that Birmingham must take immediate action to address those issues and will be monitoring the Council's progress closely. I also understand that the Secretary of State has requested a meeting with Birmingham City Council and will be holding them to account.
Fabian Hamilton.
Mr. Speaker, Ilkley Homes builds thousands of modular houses every year in its factory near Leeds, many of which are completely carbon zero, meaning no bills at all for residents. But today, it is facing the prospect of collapse, putting 4,200 future homes and 1,500 current jobs at risk. Now, given that the Home Builders Federation says new housing units could drop to just 120,000 next year, does the Prime Minister now accept that his government's scrapping of housing targets was the wrong decision?
Well, Mr. Speaker, it wouldn't be right for me to comment on the circumstances of any individual company, but what I can say is I make absolutely no apology for respecting what local communities want in their local areas. Whilst the party opposite may want to ride roughshod over the views of local communities and impose top-down housing targets and carpet over the green belt, that is not something that this government will do.
Robert Court. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As we speak, the Royal Air Force is operating the Hercules farewell flypast over all parts of the UK.
For over 107 years, my constituents of 47 Squadron have defended our country, including over 50 operating the legendary Hercules. Now, as the Squadron stands down, would my right honourable friend join the whole House in paying tribute to this remarkable record of service of this amazing Squadron? They're all men and women who have made their country proud.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I join my honourable friend in paying tribute to 47 Squadron. Their association with the Hercules now stretches for 45 years. And although their vital work at the heart of defence has often been unheralded, the Squadron has served with professionalism and distinction throughout. I think the whole House will join me in saying that the personnel and crews can be rightly proud, and they have our full thanks.
Mr. Speaker, my constituent Sarah has been let down by this government. Her elderly father, a veteran living with cancer, has developed serious heart problem. His next appointment is scheduled for November. In a cost of living crisis, my constituent paid for private care, as he cannot wait 5 months for an appointment. He has now been diagnosed with heart failure. This is the reality of Tory Britain. Elderly and sick people neglected and turned away. The Conservatives have broken the NHS and they've broken Britain. The British public deserves so much better. Only the Labour Party can deliver this. So when will the Prime Minister call a general election?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I am very sorry to hear about, I believe it was Sarah's father, and I hope he has a speedy and gets all the treatment that he needs. With regard to the NHS, Mr. Speaker, we're investing record sums in the NHS, but also with more doctors, more nurses, more diagnostic scans to identify cancers earlier, and with elective surgical hubs to get the wait lists down. We're starting to see progress, having practically eliminated those waiting 18 months, but there is more work to do, Mr. Speaker, and I'm pleased that the NHS is fully supporting our plan and getting on with delivering it for people.
Hello, Colburn. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Prime Minister and the Health Secretary for the recent announcement that the Epsom and St Helier NHS Trust can proceed with plans to improve and upgrade St Helier and build a brand new hospital in Sutton. Now, the NHS Trust is really ready to go. They're further along than other trusts in that cohort. So can the Prime Minister assure me that when the Trust is ready to go, the Treasury and the Government will be ready to give the green light to them as well?
Prime Minister. Well, can I thank my honourable friend for all his campaigning and focus on this issue for his constituents. We remain committed to the new hospital scheme for the Epsom and St Helier University Hospitals Trust. It will deliver brand new state-of-the-art facilities as part of our new hospital programme. I know the department are working closely with the Trust to make sure that we can progress works as soon as possible and expect the new hospital to be delivered by 2030.
Mr. Virendra Sharma.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Throughout the war in Ukraine, the largest mobile operator, Q-Star, has kept its services operating at 93% and is investing millions in Ukraine's recovery. Will the Prime Minister, therefore, use next week's Ukraine Recovery Conference to bring together governments and the businesses to invest in Ukraine's telecoms recovery and ensure the people of Ukraine are kept connected with their loved ones throughout the war?
Prime Minister. Can I thank my honourable friend for the very thoughtful and powerful question. He's absolutely right about the aim of next week's Ukraine Recovery Conference Summit, which we're very proud to be hosting. And indeed, the theme of that summit is how to bring in private capital to help rebuild Ukraine after this devastating war. And I join him in paying tribute to all those companies who, in the face of the onslaught that they are seeing, are providing essential services for the people of Ukraine. They deserve our absolute admiration and support.
Sally Ann Hart.
Mr. Speaker, last week we acknowledged and celebrate carers, of which there are thousands across beautiful Hastings and Rye. Would the Prime Minister join me in thanking them all for their priceless value and congratulate Hastings Voluntary Action and the Isabel Blackman Centre in receiving local care for the Carers Awards for their support of unpaid carers in our communities, and the outstanding CQC-rated Radfield Home Care in Hastings, which recently won a national award?
Prime Minister. Well, I join my honourable friend in congratulating carers in her constituency for all their awards. I'm also incredibly proud of our health and care staff across the country and recognise their extraordinary commitment. And I'd also like to pay tribute to unpaid carers and young carers for all that they are doing in Hastings and across our nation.
Johnson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Funding to bring desperately needed
inpatient mental health beds to Bedford is sitting in the bank account of our local mental health trust, not to be touched because of this government's ridiculous capital spending limits. So will the Prime Minister will meet with East London Foundation Trust, apply some common sense and find a way to release the cash to get this mental health unit built so my constituents don't have to travel miles to access services?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we are investing record sums in NHS capital, and particularly I can tell the honourable member that we're putting more money into mental health services and taking more action than any previous government. At the heart of the NHS long-term plan is the largest expansion of mental health services in a generation. I'll ensure that the appropriate minister writes to him with an update on the conversations between his trust and their local capital plans.
Henry Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What assessment has the Prime Minister made of the Eurozone being in recession and the UK economy experiencing growth?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as we've seen recently, it's not just the OBR, but the OECD, the Bank of England and the IMF who have all upgraded the growth forecast for the UK economy. Whilst the party opposite may want to talk it down, it's the Conservatives that are delivering.
Prime Minister, 39 women have died violently in Northern Ireland since 2017. The police are called to a domestic violence incident every 16 minutes, and ours is now one of the most dangerous regions in Europe to be a woman. Stormont has consulted on a strategy to tackle violence against women, but there are no ministers to take it forward. The outstanding Women's Aid Federation learned last month that their core funding is being taken away. In the demoralising absence of a government, will the Prime Minister work with me and others to ensure that strategy is enacted and funded so that we can tackle the cultures and behaviours that are having such devastating impacts on women in Northern Ireland?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I join with the Honourable Lady in saying that it's absolutely right that we do everything to stamp out violence against women and girls. That's why the government passed the landmark Domestic Abuse Act, set up a 24/7 victim line and quadruple funding for victim support. She's also right to highlight, though, that the people of Northern Ireland are not getting the local government that they need and deserve. And I want to see that as much as she does, and I'll continue to work hard to bring that about.
Philip Davis.
Mr. Speaker. One of the socialist landmines the Prime Minister has inherited from the former member for Uxbridge and South Ruislip. I'm sure the Prime Minister remembers him. He's the one who said that we should be more conservative. If only he'd had a majority of 80 and been Prime Minister, he might have been able to do something about it. But if one of the landmines he left behind was the idiotic triumph of the nanny state of banning buy one get one free and other special offers on products that the Department of Health thought was unhealthy. Now, at the best of times, that is an idiotic triumph for the nanny state, but during a cost of living crisis, it is utterly bonkers. So can I ask the Prime Minister if he will intervene, pursue a more conservative agenda, as the former member for Uxbridge would want him to do, and scrap this ridiculous policy?
Minister.
Well, can I thank my honourable friend? He's long highlighted this policy, which is why, after I took office, given the concerns that he and others had raised about the impact on the cost of living, we already have, as he knows, postponed the introduction of this policy. No final decisions have been made, but I'll continue to take what he said very seriously in all our deliberations.
Stephen Doherty.
Mr. Speaker, Citizens Advice Cymru have told me of soaring numbers of people coming to them struggling with housing affordability. And last year, the monthly cost of a new mortgage rose by 61% for the average semi-detached house. And most fixed-rate mortgages coming to an end in this current 12-month period were set at interest rates below 2%. So the crisis will worsen for homeowners and renters. So what advice does the Prime Minister have for my constituents suffering the consequences of Tory economic chaos? Should they cut back on food, switch off the electric and gas, or get further into Tory-fuelled expensive debt?
Well, Mr. Speaker, our number one priority is to halve inflation so we can reduce the upward pressure on interest rates. His constituents should know that what would make that task absolutely worse is his party's plans for tens of billions of pounds of unfunded borrowing, which would just exacerbate the situation. But what I would say is for those homeowners that are worried, what they can do is ask for help through the Support for Mortgage Interest Payment Scheme, which has recently been adjusted. That support is there available for them. And my honourable friend, the Chancellor, has spoken with the FCA to ensure that banks treat all those in difficulty with the fairness and compassion that they need.
Dr. Kieran Miller.
Mr. Speaker, I was pleased to deliver my report into the opportunities provided by Deep Geothermal last week, and I'm looking forward to visiting the opening of the Deep Geothermal plant at the Eden project, championed by the member for St Austell and Newquay, next week. Will the Prime Minister join me in meeting with MPs that want to join him in having the benefits of a deep geothermal plant in their own constituencies?
Prime Minister.
Well, can I thank my honourable friend for his work on this report? I know it's an area that he's rightly passionate about. The government does support the development of geothermal projects in the UK, providing it can be done at an acceptable cost to consumers and in an environmentally friendly manner. I will ensure that he gets a meeting with a relevant minister to discuss his report and ideas further.
Lillian Greenwood.
Mr. Speaker, Nottingham is devastated by the senseless attacks that took place on our streets yesterday. The thoughts and prayers of the whole city are with the family and friends of those killed and with those injured. It is absolutely heartbreaking to see the pictures of University of Nottingham students, Barnaby and Grace, whose young lives, so full of potential, have been tragically cut short. As ever, we thank the emergency services who acted quickly and courageously to save lives. Will the Prime Minister ensure that his government provides the police, the universities and others in our city with everything that they need to support our constituents following these horrendous events?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, like the rest of the country, I've been moved by the heartbreaking tributes from their loved ones. This is an extraordinarily difficult time and every parent's worst nightmare. The hearts of the whole country are with the families and all those who have lost their lives. As the Honourable Lady will, I'm sure, understand, I can't comment further at this stage, given there's an ongoing situation, but the Home Secretary will be making a statement after Prime Minister's questions.
With an intervention from Lillian Greenwood, one of the MPs, a Labour MP in the area around the University of Nottingham, of course, where those tragic killings took place yesterday. Those events were reflected upon by both the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, and the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer, at the opening of Prime Minister's questions. And no doubt there'll be more information about that investigation coming through. But obviously the focus was on condolences to the families of those who were killed and tributes to the emergency services. Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, focused his question, certainly at the beginning, on the controversial resignation honours list of the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson. And there was something of a dispute and debate about the system altogether before moving on and saying it's just a distraction from much more important issues like the cost of living. We're going to discuss all of that with our guests for this part of the programme. Rachel Maclean for the Government, Housing Minister, Thangam Debonair, Shadow Leader of the House of Commons, and Nick Eardley, the BBC's Chief Political Correspondent. He linked the two, of course, because, as he said, the Prime Minister should be more focused on the misery for homeowners, but is distracted by the former Prime Minister and his resignation honours list. What did you make of it?
It's been a really tricky week for Rishi Sunak, actually, and both of these things are very uncomfortable for the Prime Minister because we've been focusing on the people who didn't get peerages, but there's also been a lot of controversy over the members of Downing Street staff who did. That's what Keir Starmer wanted to focus on. And although, you know, there were the political barbs there, Rishi Sunak's defence is quite simply, that's the process, and I'm going to play by the process. But I think this economic question is one that's really going to be difficult for Rishi Sunak because he's staked his premiership on turning the economy around. There have been some OK figures when it comes to things like GDP, But the mortgage rates question, that's one that people are feeling in their pockets, and it's one that a lot of Tory MPs are really nervous about.
Well, particularly with the predecessor, Liz Truss, being forced out, really, over the issue of market turmoil following that mini-budget. Let's start with the honours system. Rachel McLean, does it need reforming? Should it be changed?
Look, I think there's a process that the Prime Minister has been very clear that he's followed that process, and that's a standard process that we've seen through Labour Prime Ministers when they've left office.
Sure.
I mean, look, you know, I'm not focused on this either. I have a really important job to do in housing, in delivering the houses that the country needs, and I have a really important job to do in representing my constituents, and they are not coming to me in their droves saying this is a priority for us. That will be a distraction. We have to get on with our 5 priorities: stopping the boats, cutting the waiting
But is it
list,
distracting? Is it distracting the government and Rishi Sunak from
growing
concentrating
the
on those
economy
priorities
and dealing with the NHS?
And is it
list?
distracting the government from those priorities?
No, I don't believe it is. What you've seen today is a Prime Minister who is focusing solely on those 5 priorities, which are the priorities of the nation. They're reflected in my postbag as a Member of Parliament. I'm sure they're reflected in all of my colleagues as well. And he's got a very difficult job to do. There is more to do, but we are starting to see those early signs of some of that work.
We'll come on to that. Let's just stick with the honours system, because it has taken up an awful lot of political oxygen this week. If Keir Starmer wins the next general election, Thangham, he may have a resignation honours list receiving from Rishi Sunak. Will he interfere with that?
Well, I think we need an honours system. I think we do. You know, so for instance, in the honours this year, Nora Arby in my constituency founded an autism support group for parents of children with autism. It's great that she was publicly recognised.
But would he vet Rishi Sunak's resignation list if there were people on there you didn't think were deserving?
The point Keir's trying to make here is that Rishi Sunak has effectively waved through a set of honours which contains people on it who helped the former Prime Minister to cover up or get away from or evade responsibility for his rule breaking. That's what's happened. But it's also distracted him. And in dealing with this argument, he's failing to sit down around the table with the doctors, deal with the fact that we've got soaring mortgages.
Should Labour change the system so that we don't have this distraction in the future?
Well, we're certainly going to be changing parts of we're going to be changing the House of Lords, and I think that's important. And that's part of this honours system, isn't it? It's who's been bumped up to the House of Lords. I think it is quite interesting that one of the comments from Nadine Dorries appears to be that she's sulking about not being bumped up to the House of Lords, so she's resigned from the other legislature where she could have actually continued to be an MP.
But despite all this criticism, rightly or wrongly, you're not going to change the honours system.
Well, I think we need an honours system, don't we? Right. But there's been a lot of mischief made this week about saying that Tony Blair and Gordon Brown did the same. Well, that's just it's not the case, and we know that.
Right. I mean, should it be changed to stop future distraction? You say it's a process. We know it's a process, but it doesn't seem to be working very well, certainly in the last few weeks with this resignation honours list. Should that system change?
No, I don't think the system should change. I think that obviously, look, you are journalists, you're doing your job. It makes a lot of good headlines, but actually it is not a priority for my constituents. It is not a priority for this government. I'm quite interested to hear that Labour are now going to reform the House of Lords.
Yes,
that will be a huge distraction for them if they were to get into a government from actually focusing on the priorities of the people, which is not reforming the House of Lords.
That's not what's happening at the moment.
Or the honours system.
That's not what's happening at the moment. It's mortgage misery, as the headlines
Well, we're going to come on to it. But just
finally,
finally, should Nadine Dorries, the former cabinet minister under Boris Johnson, should she get a peerage?
If the process was set up and the Prime Minister nominated her and the due diligence was done, and she met all the criteria, then she should get a peerage.
Clearly, she didn't meet all the criteria.
Clearly, that has not happened. The process has decided that she should not be honoured in that way.
Right. No.
So therefore, she's not going to get a peerage.
So she's not been hard done by then.
The process has honoured people who helped Boris Johnson to try and get away with things that he did that were rule-breaking, that broke the law. This has been rewarding cronies, and that's just not on. And Keir Starmer would never do that. He would never exploit the honours system to do what Boris Johnson has done.
That may be a hostage to fortune, mightn't it, Thangham?
Rule-breaking.
Note it down.
Yes, and feel free.
Rachel, Nadine Dorries has said she's going to stand down, but she's keeping you in limbo by not telling you when, and it seems like she's going to try and eke this out for as long as possible. What's the government's message to her?
It's not for me to give a message to Nadine. She's been a fantastic MP for all this time. She was a serving health minister. She did an amazing job through the pandemic, and she's been a personal friend and supporter of mine. What I'm going to focus on is going to Mid-Bedfordshire and campaigning to keep that seat Conservative.
You can't do that once she remains.
No.
Are you quite relaxed about her keeping us all in limbo about her her
I'm
plans?
sure that she will make her announcement in due course.
She did.
Meanwhile, I am focusing on making preparations for whenever that by-election is called so that we can retain that seat for the
But you're a friend of hers, you just said that, and she's been very supportive to you. Have you spoken to her?
No, I haven't spoken to her at the moment, no.
Rachel, she is burning the house down on the way out. She said that she's going to resign, but she hasn't actually resigned. That means that is she going to be still around for when we debate the Standards Committee report next week so that she can say whatever it is she wants to say? This is disrespectful. I actually feel quite sorry for Tory MPs having to put up with this mess when you probably do want to get on with the country's priorities, but I don't see that happening at the moment. Completely distracted, this Prime Minister is at the moment by his own psychodrama. It's just absolute chaos.
Will you persuade her? Could you persuade Nadine Dorries to go? So
I would not dream of persuading Nadine Dorries. She is her own woman and she will make her own decisions.
All right, well, your Housing Minister, let's have a look again at this headline in the Eye. Mortgage misery set to be as bad as 1980s, with interest rates heading for 5.75%. I mean, there are predictions that it could go up that high. They're at 4.5% interest rates at the moment, and next Thursday the Bank of England will decide whether to raise them again. It's gone up again and again over many, many months. What are you doing about it?
Well, as I said earlier, the Prime Minister's priorities are to tackle inflation. Inflation is the issue that is really affecting people in their pockets. That's why it's right that the Bank of England, the independent Bank of England, is taking the action it's taking. These are the actions that will deal with inflation, that will have the greatest impact on people's cost of living, whether it's their food bills, their weekly shop, and their energy bill, which we provided a huge amount of support for. So on the interest rates, what we know is this is a global issue. We know that interest rates around the world
But there are other global
because
issues you have helped people with, obviously during the pandemic, and the same with energy bills. Is there any specific bill or money or support that the government is going to give to people struggling to pay their mortgage payments?
Yes, so there is. I mean, the government has stood behind people all the way through the pandemic when they were hit by extraordinary costs.
Yeah.
We supported people with energy bills, with furlough.
Yeah.
We've continued
And
to
with
do
this?
that. We've seen the Prime Minister say just today that there is support for people who are struggling with their mortgage payments. And don't forget, we are giving people support for their energy bills, which is helping
not
them with
specifically for their mortgage bills.
What there is specifically for their mortgage
what is
bills.
it then?
I've just mentioned it. The Prime Minister mentioned it.
Which is?
In PMQs. It's a mortgage support scheme.
And what's that?
Well,
I mean,
it's a
how do
scheme
people
where
apply?
I'm sure that there will be details on YouGov.
Rachel, you're the housing minister.
I am the housing minister.
You should know what
can
this
you
is.
just let me finish? I do know what it is. Obviously, there are a huge amount of details depending on individual people's circumstances. What I would encourage them to do is go to gov.uk. They will be able to see all the support that is out there. Banks have been encouraged, the Chancellor has been meeting the banks to talk to banks and mortgage lenders about how they will support individual mortgage holders. What the people should do if they are struggling is go straight to their mortgage lender, and that is where they will be tapping into the support.
Well, and many mortgage lenders, of course, are pulling their latest products as a result. I mean, I'll take what you say at face value, of course, in terms
you
of
heard
this
the
new
Prime
scheme.
Minister talking about it
Yes,
in
although the
PMQs.
details seems to be a bit shaky.
The details are not
What would
shaky.
you-
I'm in a television
shaky,
studio.
not shady.
No, the
shaky.
details are not shaky. I'm in a television
Well, we're going to have a look at it. We're going to have a look at it. We're going to go onto gov.uk and we'll look at it.
On gov.uk, and as any government scheme is, you can't expect me, in the 30 seconds you're giving me,
you are the
to
housing
explain
minister,
a
Rachel.
full scheme. I am the housing minister. Mortgages are dealt with by the Treasury. You've seen what the Chancellor is doing.
Oh, come on, Rachel.
What do you mean, come on?
116,000 households every month they come to the end of their fixed-rate mortgages. That's 116,000 households, some of whom may be listening today and thinking, well, what is the scheme?
I've just set it
No,
out.
you haven't
I've just
set
set it out.
You've just
I
said
think
go
you
to
weren't
gov.uk.
listening to me.
Oh,
All
no,
right.
I most certainly
If you were listening to me, you would have heard
Well,
me
we've done
talking
that.
about
Hang
the
on,
support
Rachel.
for
Just
the
hang on.
energy bills
Hang
that
on.
we are giving
Yeah,
to people.
but that is
That's not
different.
been given
Let me
to
just hear
all
from
the way
Labour.
through
Let me
the
just hear from
pandemic.
Thangan. What specific policy do you have to help people with their mortgage payments? The Liberal Democrats have a policy of giving struggling homeowners a grant of £300 a month. What policy do you have?
Well, don't prop up a government that crashes the economy in the first place.
Well,
This
that's not
is
a
the
policy.
direct
That's not a
result.
policy to
This
help
is the
mortgage
direct
payments.
result of the chaos that was caused by the Liz Truss Kwasi Kwarteng failed budget, which is catastrophic, and we're seeing the results go
It's not,
month
it's
after
a
month after
global-
month.
it is a
no,
global
you know,
situation.
You're saying that Liz
We've
Truss's
had a
budget
war
had
in
no
Ukraine.
effect
Don't talk over each
whatsoever.
other because people can't hear.
Are
I'll
you
come to
really saying that Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng's budget has had no effect. I'm sure you know that's not the case.
Well, except the Andrew Bailey, the Bank of England governor, has said there was a short-term premium on interest rates at the time of that mini-budget you're talking about. But in January, the risk premium, as he called it, had pretty much gone by the start of the year. Do you accept that?
I think that what we're finding is every household at the moment is looking at their mortgage, looking at their rent, looking at their food prices and saying, how on earth am I going to get through it the next month? And that's not just people on the lowest incomes. That's people on medium incomes in good jobs who are finding that their mortgages have gone up by £500 a month, £2,000 and upwards a year. That is putting pressure on working people up and down this country, including those on good jobs. It's just not good enough for Rachel to sit here and say, look at gov.uk.
Well, we're looking at it. What should people do, though, Rachel, right now, apart from go onto the scheme that you have mentioned, and so did the Prime Minister, if they can't afford their mortgage? There was a suggestion in the papers the other day that people should consider taking on a lodger, for example, to help pay those higher bills.
Well, what I've just said is the first thing they should do is speak to their mortgage lender. They will have access to all the various forms of support that are tailored to their particular circumstances. I would make the point that we have recently seen wages rising at a very, very high level, which is putting more money in people's pockets. That is a result of the actions this Prime Minister has taken, dealing with inflation. The Independent Bank of England is obviously taking the right steps. The IMF has already said that this country is on the right path to tackle those global issues which have been caused by a COVID pandemic and the war in Ukraine, which is affecting energy prices for every country in the world, and that is why we are laser-like focused on those five priorities.
Nothing to see here.
Right.
I think you're just not listening to me, because I have now said 3 times that there are government schemes to help people with their mortgages, and people need to phone their mortgage lenders, and that's where they will find the support that has been made available.
Let me just
by the
interject here
Chancellor.
before we move on. Look at this Guardian story, Thangham Debonair, for us. Labour rules out universal childcare for young children in fiscal credibility drive. Are you disappointed about that?
Well, actually, we never had a policy of universal free childcare, but we are focused on our vision.
We were promised by Bridget Phillipson that it was going to be the most radical, revolutionary childcare since 1945.
And it will, but unfortunately the effect of the Tories on the economy is so terrible that we cannot responsibly set out a promise now for free childcare for everybody. That's just not practical, given the state of the economy. So what we're going to do, we never had a policy of universal free childcare, but what we have got is a vision for every parent, for every child to have the childcare that they need between the end of maternity leave and the end of primary school. Now, we're starting with free breakfast clubs because we know exactly how we're going to pay for that. And that matters, that we know exactly how to pay for that, because it would be frankly reckless and irresponsible for me to promise a single penny that we don't know how we're going to pay for.
Right, including the commitment to invest £28 billion a year. That pledge has also been watered down.
We are going to invest £28 billion in renewable energy and getting us to net zero.
Immediately when you win the next election, as you want to.
I would prefer us not to be left the set of economic circumstances, the appalling levels of growth that the Tories are obviously going to leave us with. But I'm afraid they are doing that. I dread to think what they're going to do next.
Yeah, but what's the point of voting if you're not going to do anything different?
No, that's not true. We are going to be investing £28 billion. We are going to get to net zero by 2030. It will be tough, and we will have to do that with the economic circumstances that this lot are leaving us with.
Nick?
Rachel suggested we go into gov.uk and find this scheme. I think I've done it. There is a help scheme for people who want assistance with paying interest on mortgages. But Rachel, you're correct, I'm sure if I'm wrong. I think it only applies to people who are on certain benefits, like universal credit. And I think there is a wider question being asked in the country about people who aren't on benefits, some of whom might be middle earners, who are seeing their mortgages go up by £700-800 in some cases a month. What's your message for them? Because they can't just remortgage. They can't just go to the bank and say, we'll get a new mortgage. They're stuck with really high mortgage payments. A lot of them are really struggling.
So, look, what I would say is I totally recognise the pressure on these mortgage payers because of the global factors. The interest rates are rising around the world, which is why the government has stepped in to support this cohort and also to support families across the country with paying half their energy bills, which of course is a significant drain on their household budgets. because also the actions that we're taking as a government, we're seeing wages go up. That will help ease the pressures for people. But of course, we recognise that these global factors, a global pandemic, Putin weaponising the source of energy, is of course going to cause problems. But the last thing we need at the moment is Labour's unfunded pledges. If they were in government, can you just let me finish? The last thing we need is their ideas, which would completely cause chaos for working people and send inflation through the roof.
I have to let Thangham respond, and then we must move on.
Why we are focusing on tackling the debt and getting the debt down and getting the economy
There
growing.
is not a single unfunded pledge. Not a single one. And the reason for that is because when you spend taxpayers' money, they haven't got a lot of it right now. They are spending £400 to £500, £600 a month more on their mortgages, for which you have no answer. So, of course, we're not making a single unfunded spending pledge. And that is the right thing to do because it's taxpayers' money and they haven't got a lot of it.
Something else that voters will be interested in and concerned about, and that is the junior doctors' strike. Let's have a look at this headline. In BBC News, hot weather adds to NHS pressure as doctors strike. It's a 72-hour walkout. It started this morning. The British Medical Association, the Doctors' Union, wants to see pay cuts over the last few years reversed. But health bosses have warned that the current hot weather combined with the strike will cause major disruption for the NHS. Joining us here in the studio, Dr Robert Lawrenson, co-chair of the Junior Doctors Committee at the British Medical Association. Is it responsible to strike now, in the middle of this heatwave?
So we need to recognise that there are pressures all year round in the NHS, and you're right to suggest that winter is not the only time of year where the NHS struggles. The NHS struggles every single day of the year because after 15 years of consecutive pay cuts, we have a massive workforce crisis, not just for doctors, but all healthcare professionals.
But people are really worried about it now. People in your profession, in the NHS, the medical director of NHS England has said the strike will have an enormous impact and there will be significant disruption with the strike and the hot weather coming together, particularly with respiratory illnesses and conditions. He says some patients will have appointments postponed. Does it make you think twice?
We've got a lot of consultant colleagues and specialist associate colleagues working in A&Es and intensive cares and high dependency units across hospitals across the country. What I think is really important, though, is that this is a significant issue and that Rishi Sunak should be actually meeting with us, making an effort to stop these strikes instead of hiding behind a health secretary who he has not empowered to give us a proper pay deal that recognises the pay erosion we've had. We were offered 5%, and I noticed that, Rachel, you mentioned that this government is seeing wages rise, not for doctors, not for the last 15 years, and certainly not for this year with the offer that was presented to us.
Rachel?
Well, I think it's really regrettable that we're seeing these strikes and they do nothing except put patient safety at risk. So what I want to see is this resolved as soon as possible. And the offer is always there that if the strikes are called off, those talks can continue. It's a shame that the strikes are going ahead, which means that the talks can't continue. But I think we need to get real here. I mean, the 35% pay rise is just not sustainable. It's going to cost something like £2 billion. It depends how you calculate it. But that is, I think most people would understand that, look, you know, we all value doctors and the work they do and the work the NHS does. But we need to have a sensible and proportionate approach to this.
So I'm really glad that you recognise that the government collapsed talks and walked away and are refusing to talk to us.
That's not what I recognised.
Yes, you did.
My
You said that it was impossible for you to talk to us during
Don't talk over each other.
action.
Yeah, but
And
why are you... They want you to stop the strikes and then they'll talk to you. Why don't you do that?
So that's a ridiculous assertion and premise for the government to present. They want us to de-arm ourselves and put us in a similar position to the position that we've been in for the last 15 years, where they are able to bat us over the head and cut our pay year on year.
Right. What do you say to that, Rachel?
Well, I don't think any government can negotiate on that basis. I mean, you know, we need to resolve these strikes. Talks have been going on. The government has been very clear that we will look at all the issues across the board in terms of the NHS, and there is a lot of investment going into the NHS. I've seen that in my local area. We've got record numbers of doctors and nurses working in the NHS. I think everybody needs to come together now, but we need to call the strikes off because they're doing nothing except delay appointments for patients that need them and putting people's lives at risk, and it's just not a responsible process.
Will Labour give junior doctors a 35% pay rise?
I mean, you wouldn't expect me to negotiate with the doctors.
Well, we know
live on
Wes
air, so we're
Streeting
not
has
going
said.
to
Well,
do
Wes
that.
Streeting has said he wouldn't. So, what would you offer?
As I said, I'm not going to negotiate live on air, and I think that would be wholly inappropriate. What that Lawrence and his colleagues need is for the government to get round the table. Now, last Friday, Rishi Sunak had time to argue about Boris Johnson's honours list and no time to meet doctors. That's a disgrace.
But would you want
They
them to
need
call off the strikes before you sat round a table?
I am sorry that the strikes are necessary, but I completely understand why doctors feel that they have to do this, and I urge the government, even at this late stage, just pick up the phone and start negotiating.
But be honest, because Rachel's been talking to Robert Lawrenson. What would you say to him in the position of being in government? Would you say, be realistic, you can't have a 35% pay rise?
We would have been talking to him before now. We know we can't afford 35% at the moment, but I'm not going to negotiate live on air when I'm not the health secretary.
You're not going to get.
Wes Streeting quite rightly said.
You're not going to get 35% with either a incoming Labour government or the existing Tory government.
So, Rachel said that the government is willing to negotiate, like they always are, but that's not true. In fact, they weren't even willing to recognise the independent pay review body's recommendations in full, which clearly reported last year that without addressing junior doctor pay, there would be a significant impact on patient safety, not because of strikes, but because of the pay and its effect on productivity and retention. You did not recognise the supposedly independent pay review body's report in full, and that's why this government has shown no willingness to actually negotiate properly or resource or fund our workforce properly, and it's left it in a workforce crisis.
Right, do you think it's affordable, though? Do you think it's actually affordable, listening to all of the economic data that's been presented today? We've been talking about rising mortgage rates, the cost of living crisis, and you are asking for a 35% pay rise, almost 3 times the amount of inflation.
So percentages always sound dramatic when they're dealing with low numbers, because percentages are all about relative change.
But the Nuffield Trust doesn't agree with you.
Our basic pay starts on £14 an hour, and we're looking for a doctor to start on £20 an hour. Is that unreasonable?
Well, I'll leave that question hanging. Thank you very much for joining us and the rest of our guests. Before I go, I want to remind you Politics Live is now a podcast on BBC Sounds. That means if you want to listen to just the audio of any episode of Politics Live, you can do it. I'll be back tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Or you can just come on my fucking YouTube channel, fall asleep to it, listen to it that way, if you want. To be fair, I always listen to YouTube and fall asleep. Mostly Warhammer 40k. I don't know. I like this shit. Oculus Imperator is my favourite dude at the moment who I listen to. I do like Luton though, to be fair. He's quite good. But yeah. And some other fella. I've got to name him because he's actually fucking good as well. Begins with a B. Anyway, right. Oh, it worked. That's interesting. Now let's see if it works instead. Can I give this a new name? Let's just call it. Bear with me. I'm trying something new, and you're going to witness me do it. Right, you're gonna watch me do it. Or at least try it. At least. Now, there you go. There's it works. Woo! Alright, good. Let's see if the fucking audio works, shall we? It's not exactly the same size, but who gives a fuck? I'll stretch over and all that, I suppose. Right, so I can use me better version. So I normally use this one for Twitch, but the one I actually like the most, it's got better features on it, is this one. So now I don't know. Okay, it's good. It showed up. Now I don't know if the audio is gonna work. Let's have a go there. But this one is about housing. If you don't know what this is Bim. He's a Tory. Resigned during Boris Johnson's government. In fact, I think he's on the first to resign. Let's have a gander, shall we?
Social housing.
Bim Afalami.
We need to do what Harold Macmillan did in the 1950s as housing secretary, the most successful housing secretary ever, which is build a lot of social housing.
It's not just me. Oh, by the way, before I play this video, this is not my video, clearly. I want to thank Politics Joe. I do subscribe to Politics Joe. If you like politics, get on it. Politics Joe's a great channel. I've been sub to it since it was a tiny channel, actually. For ages, basically. And now it's got like 355k subscribers, which is a lot. Just so you know. Yeah, it's a really good channel. So I hope you don't mind me using this video. But you know, my favourite bugbear is fucking housing at this point. Well, it has been for a while, like, but still. Anyway, I'll shut up. Let's get on to it and listen, shall we?
BMF Alami, MP for Hitchin and Harpenden. First Tory MP in the Joe office.
No, I can't believe that, actually.
How do you feel about that?
That surprises me. I'm very happy. Surprised, but happy to be
Why
here.
does that surprise you?
Because if you're in politics, you should always be trying to talk to as many people as possible, from old, young, left, right, whatever party you're in, because ultimately everybody has an equal vote, right? So why shouldn't you be engaging with every media organisation, particularly one that's got the reach that you guys have here?
I mean, the sell on that, you know, that's the best sell we could have possibly asked for. You're not sponsored.
No, I'm not paid. I'm not sponsored.
We're here to talk about millennials, aren't we?
We are.
And how you're going to win back the millennial vote.
That's the plan.
Yeah, so it all comes from this concept that as people get older, they become more right-wing, which means they start to vote Tory again. And you don't think that's happening anymore?
Well, there was always this view that, broadly speaking, as people went through life stages, they got older. You know, they got married, they bought a home, they got a more steady job, they started to worry about their community, their pension, etc. And then they retire and then they die. All of those life stages are meant to make people more conservative. And for the sort of the baby boomer generation, that definitely happened. But all the indications are, and we've done some work, I did some work with Onward, the recent report that you mentioned, all the indications are that this isn't happening anymore. And actually, my generation, our generation, millennials, people aged roughly between 25 and 40, they aren't becoming more conservative as they age. And if you're a Conservative MP, or you want the Conservative Party to do well, then that's a problem.
And what is that? Because they've got nothing to conserve? Is that what it is?
I think that's part of it. I basically think it's for three main reasons. The first is exactly what you say. The average age, for example, of first-time buyer in 1997, so the year that we left office and the Blair landslide, was 26. Now it's 35 coming up to 36. So it's gone 10 years in that period of time. So if you are, just to use this as one example, if you are of this age group, you are seeing your chances, if you have no family wealth, which most people don't, you can see your chances of owning a home going down with no real prospect of that changing in the near future. I think that's one reason. The second is the marginal tax rate for graduates is higher than it was in the baby boomer generation. In the baby boomer generation, if you were a graduate, which most people were not, then I think tuition fees were free. Obviously nowadays they're not free. So I think that's just your marginal tax rate you're paying, the amount of money you have.
Okay, right. I do have to intervene because I can't play the entire thing without talking about it, because that would be bad. You know, go and watch the actual full thing if you don't want me to interrupt. I know, but I'm doing that out of respect for Joe, just by the way. You should go and watch the full thing anyway without me interrupting. But I do want to commentate on it because it's quite interesting. A lot of the policies that he's saying that are shite. First of all, they were fine under the Tories, right? Free tuition, right? But then you had Labour come in and do the whole globalisation spiel, which is a continuation of Thatcherism, basically, which says, oh, fuck, we can't afford schools, now the kids have to pay to go to school. But we used to pay tax for that. Nah, the universities can't afford it, so instead of just raising taxes on the rich to pay for it, no, let the fucking kids get in debt, which they don't ever pay back. Vast majority of people who go to university never fucking get a job with their degree. They're more likely to work at fucking McDonald's or some stupid shit. Media studies, that's not going to get you a job at all. Right? Not a good one, at least. You have to be a code or something useful, right? So the vast majority of people don't literally end up paying that money back. So then the government has to give it to the universities anyway. just so you know. But the housing bit gets me though. But some of these policies that he's talking about, this has been under both Labour and Tory. That's why I can't stand when people say sometimes like, oh, it's just the Tories. No, neoliberalism is the fucking problem here. And it's infected both of our political parties and still does. So just sipping my brew. If you listen to that lady before on Politics Live, she said centre-right, right? Centre-right, neoliberalism. Centre-left, neoliberalism. So the left and the right are literally marginalised by the neoliberals as extremists. That's what you get called. If you're on the left, you're a fucking Marxist extremist. Clearly not. And if you're on the right, you know, you're a fucking racist kind of thing. That's the way you like to portray it. Because their total ideology is neoliberalism. They love the centre. Because this is the only way they manage to keep power. Is in the centre. A lot of people in the United Kingdom aren't in the centre. They're either left or right. Like, no jokes. It's a very close thing. But the vast majority of it in the middle kind of thing. They only like do that because they're not asked. But if you actually give them policies, you'd be very surprised how British people vote. You'd be very surprised. Like, when I did my whole, the Red Wall's gonna fucking fail shit. That wasn't based on, you know, pulled up my ass. There's a map of the United Kingdom. Work it out. The people who lived in Labour voted heavily to leave. Right? Do you think they're going to vote for Labour in the next election? Don't think so. Goodbye. Because what was on offer at the time of the Tories, Boris Johnson was saying, vote for me, I'll get Brexit done. Labour's never winning any election if they're saying, vote for us, we'll have a referendum. Are you kidding me? No chance. So policies are very important. But I like the way this guy's literally going to basically say, common sense. If you're going to fucking build houses, build social housing. For one reason and one reason only. The government controls the fucking rent. Not a landlord or anybody else. The government can control rents anytime they want. It's their assets. All they do is they borrow it, pay the builders, build our houses, and then we'll pay it on the never never. It's that simple. And they still get money because people pay rent, but you can lower the rents. That's the thing. We can't have affordable houses if the government bother to build them. They're called council houses. You scrap them. Makes everybody want to get on a housing ladder to fucking nowhere. Make the banks fat and rich. That money should go back to the treasury, not a fucking bank. God damn it.
At the end of every week, at the end of every month, is just not very much. And I think that's a problem. And then the third is something that I feel with my age. So look, I've just turned 37. I feel I just missed, which was the global financial crisis. And why I mean just missed it, when I left university, I was offered a job. I went to become a corporate lawyer in the City of London. I was offered my job before the global financial crisis. And I remember that job market as a graduate. The job market since then, not just as a graduate for city jobs, but across the board, not just in this country, but in America and other countries in the Western world, has been much harder for new people entering the workforce for a whole range of reasons. And if you're coming into the job market after the global financial crisis, I think the world that those young people saw was very different. So I think for those three reasons, you aren't seeing this sort of automatic trend towards conservative. If that was ever the case, it was the case for the boomer generation. If you go back before that, it's a bit more complicated, but it had been the case for much of the 20th century. In the 21st century, we are not seeing that. That's why I think, as a Conservative Party, we need to understand that, be honest about it, address it, and then seek to deal with those concerns.
It's almost like sitting down with what I would hope a Labour MP would say to me in an interview. You've basically pointed out all of the symptoms that I suppose millennials are crying out for, and arguably have been ignored for the past 13 years. I mean, what do you think is the next step then? Do you think that the party needs to pivot entirely, go back to, revise all of the issues you just put out, go back to small c conservatism? I mean, how do you progress? How do you reverse what's happened over the last 10 years?
So if you take two issues in particular, one of which I think flows from the other one, which is income, just the amount of money that you have at the end of the week, at the end of the month.
And this is the problem with Labour this is the problem with people who are to the left. Right, it hasn't been 10 years. This problem's been going on since Tony Blair. It was the Labour Party who introduced tuition fees. I'm just saying, like, what the fuck? They didn't say, oh, let's build more council houses. They said the exact same shit the Tories are saying. Affordable housing for young people. Are you fucking kidding me? With what money? One would ask. I mean, how much a house? The average house in the United Kingdom is about 100 grand or some weird number. Not that they should be. Everyone lives in pitching fucking huts anyway. But let's say about 100 grand or something fucking retarded too. No, if you said to students fucking share accommodation, right? A rented accommodation. If you was to build a block of flats, clearly not with cladding on, don't do that. But build a block of flats. Each flat owned by the council, like in the good old days. Not shit fucking flats, by the way. I'm just, you know, modern at least, right? Students, young people, they would be happy to just pay rent at this point. Cheaper rent. They're getting ransacked by interest rates, and this is the problem. The fucking interest rate in this country has been so low for so long that people thought this shit's gonna last forever, and it won't. Because remember, before the crash, interest rates are normal, right? About 2%, something like that, right? And we had VAT. VAT was lower as well. I think VAT shot up to like 18%. Well, VAT was pretty low, right? So people didn't feel the pinch. Credit cards were easy to get because, well, fucking free money, I suppose. And then it all came falling down. And the interest rates now are going up because of inflation. And the inflation is not workers. It's the fact that the banks have got all the money. Keeping it all. All the money. All of it. Trillions and trillions locked away in their little bank accounts. You know what they do with it? They get money from the government to buy back their own shares and make their investors richer. I mean, you can't make this shit up. Capitalism is dead if the bankers are also playing the game. You played Monopoly, right? Imagine I'm a banker and I can loan myself money. Play a Monopoly. I'm just going to buy whatever I fucking want at that point. And then you're going to still have to pay me money when you land on fucking Fleet Street or whatever. The whole fucking thing is a big sham at this point. And, you know, give him his due to Ben here. He's going to point out something fucking obvious, which is I've been saying for ages on my streams. Housing should not be an asset in terms of the way the government portrays it to be. Like, if you want to buy your own gap, you should have all the money you need to buy it, basically. Until then, the government should build fucking council houses, basically. You shouldn't be, in the 21st century, beholden to interest rates when you get a house. I mean, one that the government legally should provide you, right? Just don't forget, it's not the government's job to sell you a house. It's the government's job to build houses. That's why you pay tax. You pay tax for them to build houses, not sell you them. They're not the middlemen here. Their fucking job is to build houses, not fucking sell you them. So every time you hear them say affordable housing, make sure that that caveat is fucking council houses, because they're the only affordable houses you will ever get. Because they're not linked to fucking interest rates at all. God damn it. I'm gonna roll here.
If a Conservative Party can't deal with that problem, then we have no business being in politics. One of our core principles since our founding has been economic opportunity, economic progression for the individual and the family. That was what Thatcher's whole ideological stance, her rhetoric, her base was built on.
I've got to be honest with you, that's not going to be a popular name to bring up on this channel.
But the point I'm trying to make to you is, as a Conservative, we have to deal with that. How do you deal with that? One aspect is obviously growing the economy. And look, we could spend a long time talking about all the things you need to do in order to do that. But I think having that as a focus, growing the economy and creating more opportunities for younger working people is really important. And to make sure that the benefits of that growth do not unfairly accrue too much to perhaps older people who already have assets, right? So it's about the distribution of that wealth. And the second thing is taxes. Because, of course, one way in which we can make sure that people have more of their own money is to reduce their taxes. And I think reducing the marginal taxes for younger people, millennials, as we're talking about today, I think is absolutely critical. Growing the economy, making sure they get the economic opportunities, reducing taxes, that's a key thing. The second, which flows from that, is affordability of housing. Now, there are all sorts, I mean, we could spend, I'm sure you have spoken on this programme before about housing market, the difficulty of getting on the housing ladder. You know, it's a very complicated, and renting.
Renting's big, yeah.
And renting, it's a big subject. I can't pretend that I have all the answers. But what I do know is that there are things the government can do to enable the market to work better. How do we do that? It's by making sure that we increase the supply of housing in a way that directly benefits the people who are most disadvantaged, which are millennials. Because one of the difficulties with how the system works now is that even when we build lots of houses in wherever those houses are across the country, putting aside the difficulty with that and the arguments about that, often those houses are bought by people who already have assets. I mean, I think the percentage of people who are over, I think the number of retirees who own a second property is over 20%. Right, which if you think about it, is huge.
Yeah.
So how do we use our existing, the new houses that we build, and indeed our existing housing stock, to more benefit the people that really need them, right? Help to Buy was a scheme that the government set up several years ago under David Cameron's leadership. It was closed in 2019. I think we should reopen it and treble it and focus it particularly to make sure that people with that scheme can save a deposit of about £36,000.
I've got a bright idea. Let's make another fucking housing bubble. Right. This is mad. Think about what he's just said, right? He just said 20% of the people who own a house own a second one. I wonder how they manage to own a second house. Because the people who live in their house are charged fucking rent that pays for their mortgage plus another house. Probably. Or at least part of another house, right? Do you know how mad that shit is? The whole point of why we've got no houses is because we've got too many people in private rented accommodation. You can't afford it, especially if the interest rates goes up like they are now. What do you think the people who owns the fucking house is going to do? Pay it on your behalf? Don't think so. They're going to give you plus some, right? They're going to go, oh, by the way, your rent's gone up. And you're like, why? They're like, well, why fucking else? It's my house. I need to pay the mortgage. Plus, I need some shit to live on. That's the only reason why you rent out your house, is to make money. You don't rent it out and make no fucking money. What would be the point? You see the scenario that we're facing here? So the only way to literally cut that bud or get rid of that scenario, do what Germany does. Most people in Germany don't buy their own house. They fucking rent it for life. Do you know why? One, it's cheap. And two, it never goes up. It's rent. The fucking government controls the rates of what you pay your rent. Not the interest rates. And this is where they're gonna fucking scam you. You give money to a bank. You only need 36 grand for your deposit, if you can afford that even. Fucking good luck, right? But then, okay, let's say you get your house. What are you gonna do next when you get bored of that one? You're gonna find a new place to live, rent it out. Same scenario that we're in today. I mean, it's ridiculous. You need to just ban selling houses, which is what we should do. I mean, first of all, I would put a fucking limit. You can only have one house. You can't have two. Right? If you're a private renter, you can't have two gaps. For sure. I mean, you can live in one, clearly. But I mean, you can't have more than two. Right? You can live in one. You can rent another one, but you can't, like, rent two of them out. That's retarded. I mean, if you're only private, if you're a company, that's a bit different because you get buy-to-let companies and shit like that. But in terms of housing stock, no new builds when it comes to buying houses, or at least limit it to like 1%, right? The only thing they should be building is fucking council houses, full stop, nothing else. Council houses for the win. Good ones, not shite ones, fucking good ones. That's the only way you're going to get around the situation. And people's mortgages won't be as mad because they'll just live in a normal house. Like I said, the government doesn't fucking pay attention to interest rates. That's why People who live in council houses, do you see their interest rates going up and their rent? No. Not at all. But no one ever mentions that on the TV. Not at all. Not once.
Which will mean that you can cover the median price of a home in the country, which is about £290,000 to £300,000, right? So I think that's one thing we can do. Secondly, the government owns 2.2 million acres in this country. Not all of it will be suitable for building, but a lot will. And on that land, we need to do what Howard Macmillan did in the 1950s as housing secretary, the most successful housing secretary ever, which is build a lot of social housing.
Oh, wow, really? I would never knew that. The most successful house building programme? What did it? We built council houses. That's exactly what we did. I wonder why. First of all, it's cheaper. A lot cheaper. People don't have to go broke to fucking live in them. And you can get them in pretty damn quick. I mean, you can build them pretty quick. Especially today anyway. Technology is completely different now. You can throw it out up in no fucking time. The rent, you just put it as a standard, right? Everyone will know the fucking price. And it doesn't go up or down, right? It just stays the same. So you can always, prepare your bills. It's like your rent's always going to stay the same. Unless next month, my fucking landlord's put my rent up by like 20 quid randomly or some shit or whatever the fuck he might charge it, right? This is the point. People need to stop with this fucking crazy idea of owning your own home. Think of it this way. You're giving your money to a fucking bank. That's all you need to worry about. Instead of giving it back to the government, your taxes, you're giving it to a fucking dirty, filthy, rich-ass bank. And I'm pretty sure they've got enough money anywho. They don't need any fucking more.
And private housing on that land, but let's have a real focus on social housing, because when you build lots of social housing, you don't just help the people that can't afford to buy a home or can only afford to rent. You're helping everybody because you're increasing the supply in the market, you're reducing the cost of rents, and by doing that, with a right to buy element as well, as long as, of course, what you need to do with the right to buy.
And more people have money to spend in their local economy, don't you know? I mean, the less you pay on rent, well, you're going to spend more, aren't you? That's the entire point. It's not Marxism, it's fucking common sense. If you spend less money on one thing, you've got more money to spend on another thing. And rent is clearly a fucking issue when interest rates are heading to fucking north of 5%. That's mad. Build council houses right now and you'd be paying fuck tons less than what you pay for any fucking mortgage that you could possibly even try and find or pay for at this present moment.
Element is make sure that you continue
replenish
building,
the stock.
replenish the stock,
Yeah.
you continue to build the housing. But I think doing that has something for everybody. If you're somebody who wants to buy your own home and think you can afford to, you can be in social housing for a period of time, save up, and then buy your home. If you're somebody that is in a low-earning profession but wants a decent place to live, and why shouldn't you, because this is Britain, then you should also have access to a great home that's new and that's built with the right infrastructure on government-owned land. This is the sort of thing the government can do.
But they can't, but I would argue, I'd push back on you slightly and say, you've got a lot of landlords who vote for you, and landlords that have benefited heavily from lack of supply and increased demand. I mean, how are you going to appease that wing of the party? Because there are certainly many MPs who are landlords themselves, or who have constituents who are very vocal about how they want to, keep landlordism alive. Yep. How do you appease them?
Landlords, a lot of them, they have children too.
Right.
And they know that their children need somewhere that they can afford to live. A lot of landlords aren't landlords out of some sort of, they don't want to become part of this rentier class that Thomas Piketty attacks in his books and this sort of thing. They're doing it because they couldn't see another safe investment for the meagre savings that they had. And they thought that on the basis of recent few decades experience, putting it into a small flat somewhere would at least accrue some wealth for them over time. Most landlords are not rich people in that sense. And actually, what we've been doing over the last 10 years has been making it less tax efficient to be a landlord. You used to get mortgage interest relief on your mortgage repayments as a landlord. That is now, I think, gone, or it's about to be completely finished. And George Osborne started phasing that out. for example. That was a huge benefit to being able to be a landlord before. Why did we put that in? Why did we remove that tax benefit? Because we wanted more supply in the private market. So I just think that one of the things that happens sometimes with parties is we think that the most recent tradition or ideological points is what's been there forever. And I think on things like housing, as a Conservative Party, we need to recognise our own heritage as a party in the 50s and 60s and 70s built lots of social housing. And I think that doing that in the modern world, in a modern way, on government-owned land, building the infrastructure at the same time as building the house.
He's just said it. The Tories built, before Thatcher got into our council houses. The whole idea of buy your own gaff started with Margaret Thatcher. The whole fucking convince people to own your own home. And what did they do when they started flogging off the fucking council houses? They didn't build any more. That's what they fucking didn't do. They didn't build any more council houses. That's why we're in this shithole that we're in today. Thatcher stopped building them and flogged all the council houses. No fucking kidding. So yeah, build more council houses, please. You bunch of titheads.
Housing so that we don't get the issues that you see too often in the home counties. Look, I'm a home counties MP, and I know this, you know, people, new housing development comes, there's no infrastructure with it, and of course people are annoyed by that, and they're right to be. So doing it in the right way, I think, can have a huge benefit and is a core Conservative principle, giving economic opportunity to people who don't have it. That's why we're in business.
Okay, build. I get that. But in the interim period of while you're getting this all approved and signed off, what do you make of rent controls? Particularly, I mean, you know, Liverpool, Manchester, London.
The problem with rent controls is that wherever they've appeared, they don't tend to work. Let's take Berlin. Berlin had rent controls, didn't have rent controls. It brought them in. And what ended up happening was the people that own the properties stopped investing in them. They stopped wanting to rent them out. And even when, so a bunch stop wanting to rent them out and they say, I'm not going to bother. And then a bunch do rent them out, but they allow them to get in a terrible state. And
I would tell you that is what most London properties, I can't speak for Manchester, but my God, the level of black mould in London rented properties, absolutely horrendous. They're just dilapidated. Some landlords don't care. They're already there.
That's true.
Because it's free money. Why would you care? It's literally free money. And this is the whole point. If you got too many of these fucking arse clowns going, shit, this is an easy way to make money. Well, they're going to make money. This is the thing. Housing is a requirement. Like national defence is a requirement. I mean, people don't fucking cry that much about paying taxes for the fucking, for the army, do you? No. Why? Well, we kind of need a fucking army. Duh. Houses. You pay tax for the government to build fucking houses. Where are they? Oh, we're building them. But I can't afford one. Get a job. Hang on a minute. What? Aren't you supposed to build council houses? Yeah, we changed the plan without telling anybody. Just saying. We saved all that money. You can pay a bank instead. And we'll just not build any fucking houses. At all. In fact, we're going to subsidise your debt. So you can still buy one. But I still don't want to buy one. Too bad then, innit? You're fucked.
And we've got to do everything we can. And actually, one thing that Michael Gove is doing is he's spending a huge amount of time putting together a package that is a lot better for renters. And I don't know all the details of it, but it's something I've spoken to him about myself, and he's very, very passionate about that.
The landlords were upset with it, so it must be all right.
Yeah, and you're completely right to focus on that. But if you would end up with more of something that's bad, I don't see why we should do it. So I don't think rent controls are the right way of dealing with it. The right way of dealing with it, as I say, is to have more social housing, which injects much more housing much faster into the market. Because I think often, and then, of course, when it's social...
He's obsessed with the word market. God bless him. Yo, social housing is not a fucking market. It's a requirement of the government to house its fucking plebs. Just so you know. For the fucking... Yeah, there is people who own their own homes. Yes, that's a market. I totally agree. But the vast majority of people don't own their own fucking gaff. Or can't afford to. You fucking mongs. So get off your fucking ass. Pull your thumb out your fucking ass. And just build council houses. This is a Tory literally saying it's quicker, it's cheaper, and it's less fucking money in rent. Don't you know? Yet they still haven't fucking done it in all the time they've been in power. I wonder why that is. Because they know they have to cough the fucking money up. And they don't want to, that's why. They don't want to spend money on the plebs. They'd rather give it to their mates in the city. Because they're the only people who make the fucking money. Right? The people in the city, all the big building corporations. And then the banks. They're all in fucking hook, line and sinker with each other, man. Saudis don't build fucking shit. It's nothing to do with supplies and all that bullshit. The government just want to cough up money. Like before, that fellow was saying, what's his name, Guter fucking, whatever his fucking name is, the guy who used to be the business correspondent for BBC. He was saying, oh, we spaffed 400 billion because of COVID. Bro, if you watch my streams and you've seen fucking Jeremy Corbyn versus Boris Johnson, how much did we borrow in that election again? That he boasted about? $500 billion? Really? And that was before COVID. Before it. So they didn't spend 400 billion, or they did, and also borrowed 600 billion. Now, 6 plus 4 is $1 trillion, the last time I fucking checked. I'm just saying. That's what the actual fuck. So yeah, that's why I love streaming, because I never forget these fucking lying bastards.
Social housing, you can direct it much more to who you need it to go to. Because, and again, I come back to this core point about economics, and the thing in the report, yes, there were other issues. Yes, people care, younger people care about the NHS, they care about transport, they care about cultural issues, they do care about a range of things, but their focus on just their economic well-being, the opportunity they had, or the perception of a lack of opportunity, that was the core thing, and that was why we sort of had something in the report saying they were shy capitalists, which, you know, isn't meant to be provocative to Joe, but it was our way of trying to describe that they were when we put to them directly, would you prefer lower taxes or redistribution? They went for lower taxes. And I think that says a little bit about the focus on economic opportunity.
I would challenge you slightly and say, do you think that perhaps that's to do with the new high rate of marginal tax? Is that the problem? Because when I look at what's coming out of my paycheck, it's huge. The amount that's coming out for student loan, the national insurance is so much higher than what my parents used to pay. Do you think that maybe millennials are just saying we can't pay any more, rather than actually just not being, you know, not wanting to redistribute wealth? It's actually just they're already charged an extortionate rate.
Well, obviously, as I mentioned, tax is a key concern, and I think we need to bring those marginal tax rates down. You know, I was very clear about that. And yes, of course, if you're feeling really pressed, then if somebody says low taxes or something else, you'll go for the low tax option. But all that I'm saying is, there's been a bit of I think pundits over the last few years, ever since the Brexit vote really, have spent a lot of time saying that economics doesn't matter anymore. The thing that matters in politics is culture, and cultural issues are the things that matter. And I'm not saying they don't matter. All that I'm saying is if you compare bread and butter issues with culture, bread and butter issues win every single time. And I put redistribution in a culture bracket, not because it is cultural, obviously we're talking about economics, but because if you say to a voter, you know, do you care about equality and redistribution? It's almost a cultural type question. It's a framing of how do they feel about the country, how do they feel about their values. The thing that matters most in politics, in democratic politics, and indeed all politics, and I think this is a good thing, is that people look out for themselves, their families, their communities, and who's going to do well. And I think that that's right. And we shouldn't allow ourselves to be distracted by a lot of cultural issues that aren't as important. And that can often, the cultural sort of debate can often be deliberately stoked
by a government who couldn't run a piss up in a brewery. I don't know. I wonder what that actual shit... Oh, yeah, we're being invaded by small boats. That's it, yeah. Not because the government's garbage at what it's doing. Let's blame the people on small boats. Yeah, let's blame them instead of the fact that the government takes a millennium to go, should you be here or not? They can't make up their mind. It's retarded, right? We got how many, like 100,000 people, some fucking stupid number, waiting to find out if they can get deported or not. I mean, can it be that fucking hard, really? I mean, to be fair, I just say, how old are you? Can you speak fucking good English? Get a job. Yeah, it's a fucking pass. Get a job. Picking fruit or whatever it is. We need them. And this is the mad thing as well. Right? We need babies. The only way you're going to get babies or people paying tax, shall we say, is if they're younger than the population who are currently getting a state pension, right? This is very important because at some point in time, in the future, very near future, which is going to be weird, the pension pot is going to be so big that it won't be affordable anymore unless you literally get rid of the fucking pension age to get all together, which would be fucking, like, that would be mad. Imagine telling French people that they'd have a civil war, right? But the pension age is based on the population birth rate, so to speak. So you can work out, well, that's the working age, this is the pension pot. So they always keep putting it up because the fucking population of babies keeps going down. So more people you having babies, they pay more taxes. You could probably lower the pension age, not drastically, but you can bring it down back into, like, you know, a reasonable age, shall we say. But if you're not making babies, that number is just going to keep going up and up and up. So yeah, stop scaring people or people in boats. If anything, fucking give them jobs and build some council houses while you're at it. Useless cunts.
Elements on both the left and the right.
Mm-hmm. Does it concern you then that many pundits think that the next election will be fought and won on cultural issues?
It does concern me insofar as I think they're going to be wrong. Mm-hmm. And I think that, and I say this to people in my own party, and I say it to people on the left, the people on the left that will spend a huge amount of time effectively importing American-style cultural debates into our own politics. You know, there was arguments about whether the UK was going to abolish rights to abortion, for example. Mm-hmm. That was never, ever on anybody's mind in this country. It never has been. And in Parliament, there's a hefty majority in favour of a woman's right to choose, for example. But there was a time when, after the Roe versus Wade debate in the US, people said, in Britain, it's like, no, it's not the case. A lot of the trans debate, again, which, by the way, affects a tiny number of people, I think gets disproportionate attention. But again, a lot of that trans debate is coming from the United States on the left. And on the right, similarly inspired by the United States, is a sort of idea of this sort of evangelical, sort of Christian right type politics, which I just do not think in this country has any purchase at all. Neither of these things is where most people are. And it's not, even if certain people will have elements of either, it's not what they care about the most. And
I shall tell you why that is. Because a lot of the American think tanks are in the United Kingdom. A lot of the advisors for the Tories and some of the Labour Party members, fucking Yanks. No kidding. And you wonder why people are like, it feels very American. Yeah, because they're fucking over here. You always get one on the BBC. She works for The Spectator now. She used to work for the fucking American right-wing think tank. Just saying. Like, a lot of these people are mad in terms of, like, their ideas. Like you said, like, is transgender thing an issue? Yeah. But does it affect, like, the vast majority of people in Britain? No. It just doesn't. It's like 0.0001% of the population. I'm just saying. And it does get over-egged. Same thing with the boats. Migration. We live in a fucking huge country when it comes to people, right? A few bobs coming on a boat ain't like we're being invaded by the fucking Germans. I'm just saying. We've lived through worse. The problem is we have a retarded bunch of people in Parliament and have done for a long time. That's the problem. We have ideologically driven chimps throwing shit at each other at Question Time. And if you watch Question Time as much as I do, not question time, that question time, PMQs I should say. Before it's question time, a lot of people say, why don't you just work together? Because they're not capable of it. You literally are brain dead, most of them. Like, they would rather see the country go to shit than agree on anything. Bit like the United States. I mean, they nearly crashed their own economy and the world economy because they're a bunch of nutters. Not like because they think of their country. No, let's stay in power. That's the only thing these politicians think about, power. I mean, you have to think about power to be a politician anyway. Fuckers.
I think that as a politician, you've got to be thinking, what is going to benefit my constituents and the country the most over the next year, next 5 years, next 10 years? That's how we should focus.
I think maybe some of that concern, though, was coming from, I mean, Rishi Sunak is probably the most evangelical Prime Minister we've had in quite some time. There's a lot of think tanks as well that are being widely influenced by this American Christian right that you talk about. Maybe it is overblown and maybe it's overhyped by the media, but there's certainly some threads that are coming through.
So you're right, but the point I suppose I'm trying to make is, because of our cultural affinity with the United States, speak the same language, we're even ethnically similar in many ways, whether it be black, white, Indian, you know, we see our cousins in the United States. A lot of political elites, and indeed business elites, and cultural elites in journalism, we just have such an affinity with the United States that we think that for the majority of people, this is how they think about the world. And there's this great writer called Tomiwa Owolade who's just written a book on race and how race and the debate around race in Britain has become increasingly sort of affected by the United States discourse, which is completely different to the British experience. And again, he's a black writer, you know, he's just saying, look, Britain, there are all sorts of difficult things in our racial history as a country, but it's not the United States. And it's a completely different thing. And I just use that as another example of how often we're importing a cultural debate that isn't really present in the lives of British people.
Exactly. I mean, that's a really good point. They had a civil war in the United States to end slavery. Just say. They literally went to war over that shit. Britain had already abolished slavery by that time, which is a bit mad. Britain was the first country to end slavery, and that was under William the Conqueror, or William the Bastard, if you're that way inclined. But yeah, we stopped it before anybody else. Look up Samuel Pete, I think his name was. He was the lawyer for the first black guy who was freed in Britain. He came over from a ship from, I think it was Carolina or some shit. He ran away, got caught, and then some people did habeas corpus on him or some shit, or did a writ of habeas corpus. Applied to a judge, and the judge found that any slave that landed on British soil was no longer a slave. There you go. So yeah, was Britain still a fucked-hearted country back in the day? Pretty sure it was. You can just read the history book. But we're definitely not like the United States. And don't forget, in the United States, slavery was I would say, a lot bigger deal than in the UK, kind of thing. I mean, it's the new world. That's where you wanted to send all the slaves. It wasn't exactly like we had loads of slaves in Britain. It was mostly America. And getting over there was a bit, well, it wasn't a bit, it was fucking horrific. So we're definitely not like the United States. But in politics terms, the amount of people who gush over political think tanks from America is fucking retarded. I mean, you can literally tell that they're getting advised by some kind of mad yanks. Like you said, this whole evangelical right thing, that's not Britain. The last consensus, I think, the most, what was it? I think everybody put down Jedi, so now Jedi's a religion. One of the most, one of the biggest religions in the UK, Jedi, because we've got a sense of humour, clearly. I'm just saying, we're not very religious. Most people in the United Kingdom would consider themselves agnostic than atheist, right? I mean, it's a lot of sod at that point. We've had too many retarded inflection points with religion. Henry VIII, say no more.
I mean, yeah, but perhaps, I mean, the Dame Louise Casey report would probably say that, lives are, people, you know, black and ethnic minorities do suffer at the hands of police in a way that white people simply don't. So, I mean, I guess that's not really an import of ideas. That is something that is actually...
And it's also based on statistics. I mean, it's a sad point, but it's a true point. If the vast majority of people, 87% of them, are white, and that's true, 87% of the people in the United Kingdom are white, and the other lot are minorities. Now, do most of the people who are white complain about race? No, because they're also white. Now, if you ask, would they treated shitty by the cops in certain circumstances? Bet your ass they will. I know loads of white people said they've had shitty run-ins with cops, but one thing they don't say is it was because I was fucking white. Clearly. Right? So, of course, minorities who have a shitty experience with cops would therefore inflect it's racist or whatever, right? That would make logical sense if we didn't have a population that was mostly white. I mean, you could find the same exact stat / thing if you went to live in, I don't know, South Africa. I mean, I'm just saying. Right? The vast majority of the cops in South Africa were white. But most of the people in South Africa, not white. You can work out the fucking issue I'm getting at there, right? I'm just so you know. So it's a bit of a weird one in that regard. I mean, a lot of these issues, they're cultural things, like you were saying. They're cultural, right? The problem is economics can literally ferment culture as well. I'm just saying. A lot of culture is based on the poor, right? I mean, if you was a cockney of a certain age in a certain time, you'd be considered just like shit on someone's shoe. I mean, has nobody seen fucking Mary Poppins or whatever, right? Always the little kid with the little cap going up the chimney, little cockney fella. You know what I mean? Right? He wasn't some little posh kid, was he? Nope. Wasn't Oliver fucking Twist. So you can have culture defined by class, and no one really talks about class anymore. I mean, it used to be a big deal growing up when I was growing up. It was always about class warfare. The rich are rich, the poor are poor. You got $1 million, you're poor. Well, you're poor, they got $1 million. Nowadays, £1 million wouldn't get you a fucking ice cream. It just wouldn't. I mean, we got billionaires galore. And why is that? Because of economic policies of people who still think capitalism should be unrestricted. It shouldn't be. The markets are there only to facilitate the fucking government, not the other way around. And this is the problem. Governments literally have given up running the fucking country. They just have. Now they just leave it to corporations, which is fucking bonkers. I mean, why the fuck do we have a government anyway? They're to govern, not sellers. Like fucking advertising fucking companies or some shit.
Embedded in our society, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, look, I am struck by when you look at the police, and I'm focusing on the Met Police, which may be unfair, but that's the
what we know most about.
They clearly have had a long-term problem with racism in that force. When someone of the political persuasion of Paul Dacre makes it his campaigning mission in the Daily Mail to talk about racism in the police, you know that there was a real problem. This wasn't somebody doing this for political wins. He wasn't doing this to support the Labour Party. He wasn't doing this to support Jack Straw or Tony Blair. He was doing it because I think he came across the Lawrence family in some capacity, and he heard their story and just thought how wrong it was. And once they started investigating, saw the difficulties. Now, I know that's from the 1990s, I think 1993, Stephen Lawrence. But if you speak to people who know the Met Police, whether they be black officers or white officers who care about this issue, they will say, yes, lots of things have improved, but there are a lot of problems still. And indeed, with Wayne Couzens, we saw the difficulty in a different way. I know that's not about race, but it was a completely different issue. Not because there wasn't a bad apple. Wayne Couzens was obviously a bad apple, but the way how the bad apple was known and was tolerated in elements of the service. And I think that that's, it's an institution that needs reform. That's clear.
it needs to be unprivatised. You know, the only do you guys know this? The Met is a private company. Did you know that? Right? The Met was formed to protect the City of London from all the ribble rabble. The City of London is not London, by the way. You do need to understand the difference. There's literally a little place in London called the City of London. It's like the fucking Vatican in London. Just so you know, it's a bit weird, but yeah. I mean, I would put it down to just training people better and vetting them better. I mean, is there lots of mad people in the world? Yes. Do they have jobs? Bet your ass to do. Just try and do a better job. Like, no system's going to be perfect at all. I don't believe in institutional racism. You can't have an institution that's racist. You can have an incompetent institution for sure. Incompetence, yes. Racist, no. Right? That's down to how it's run, basically. And if it's run by a bunch of fucking clowns, well, you're going to get a circus next, aren't you? I'm just saying. So I think they should do a better job of training people and vetting them. I mean, it would make more fucking sense that way.
Okay, let's go back to housing a little bit, because I think your ideas on it are very interesting. Can I ask you about garden cities? What was your proposal with that?
Well, garden cities, and my constituency is very close to one, Letchworth Garden City, which was, I think, 1912 or there or thereabouts in the early 20th century, and it was one of our first iterations of it. But what garden cities can be in the modern era, I think, are really three things. The first is we have the most environmentally friendly homes we can find and we can build, so that the costs of running them are really low and are almost a model to the rest of the country and internationally about what you can do with modern building methods. And secondly, you really have an opportunity to design an infrastructure that's right for the 21st century rather than the 20th. You know, whenever you go round a major city and you see on tight roads where you've got one lane here and one lane there, and then they've shoehorned a sort of cycle lane into one side and shoehorned a cycle lane onto the other side, and nobody's happy because the car users don't have enough space, and the pedestrians don't have enough space, and the cyclists don't have enough space. Now, I'm not criticizing that per se, but you know, these cities weren't designed for what we're now trying to use them for. In a garden city, we can do that, and you can do that with how you design the infrastructure, making sure that community centres, and I don't mean community centres in the sort of classic build a community centre, I mean whether they be a village hall or a town hall, or whether they be pubs or cafes or centres for sort of nursery centres or whatever it is, or sports clubs or whatever it is. Those community centres are put strategically in the right places so that you're building the right sort of communities, a bit like what the Duchy of Cornwall have done down in the Poundbury in Dorset. Now,
Poundbury is extraordinary.
Right. Now, and I'm not saying you can do Poundbury everywhere, because, of course, Poundbury, why it works is because it's right for the area in which it is. If you were doing it in the northwest, it would be different. It would look, the materials would be different, the houses would look different, and the communities would be different. But the way how they've sought to really put thousands of new homes down and do it in a way that builds brilliant communities is something we should be doing all over the country. And I just think that we've got to have that level of ambition. It sort of, you know, makes me sad when you see next to a wonderful market town anywhere in the country, and then you see a bunch of houses put next door. Yes, we built the houses, and as I said, I'm in favour of that.
I'm kind of mad because you said the northwest. Where I live in Liverpool, the only thing that you will see, really, honestly, in my city, well, at least in the city centre, is fucking students' accommodation. It's a joke. The amount of houses that could have been built where students live is fucking amazing. Like, I'm not kidding. But then at the same time, there's a sword to it. We need students. First of all, they like to get fucking drunk. And it's good for our drug trade as well, because people like to take drugs. So, in that regards, don't really mind. But what I do care about is that if you're going to build all these mad student accommodations, then don't leave council houses for, I mean, fucking 20 odd years, at least, to literally fall apart and then just board them up and just leave them there. It's ridiculous. Like, the amount of houses you can see in Liverpool that are just non-existent in terms of like, they're just there. You can just see them. That should have been redone at least 20 years ago, and people still live in them to this day. I mean, I think what the actual fuck is like the council doing. Not that the council is fucking useful, but it's amazing the amount of work you could get from knocking them fucking down would be a good start, right? And then building new ones with actual gardens would be handy. You can grow your own food in times of crisis, which is always good, just so you know. But the amount of houses that we don't actually fucking put people in because they're just boarded up in Liverpool is mind-bending. Like, literally it is. There's so many empty houses in Liverpool that have been there for like 20 fucking years. That's not a joke. I should take my phone and just show you them. But there's fucking loads of them all around the city. Right? So start with knocking them fucking things down first. And build more high-rises. High-rises are good. They are. People mightn't like to live in them. But students would love that shit. Especially if they were council ones. Because they can afford them. And then they can save money to go and move into a semi-detached eventually. If you can afford 38 grand. Don't think many people can afford 38 grand. But it's a start, right? And put them down by the docks. Because town is amazing. That's one thing I will say about Liverpool. It's got a good nightlife, right? In terms of like lots of clubs and good music. So yeah, just build loads of them. They've built some. I'm not going to lie. Or they're in the process of building some. Build fucking way more, but build council ones as well. Because the ones that are getting built now, they are nice, I'm not going to lie. So I was going to move into one. But then change my job or whatever. But, I mean, they're not that expensive. Like, if you got a full-time job, you could afford the rent, in my opinion. Or at least the ones that I was looking at. I could afford them, right? And I was working like 8 hours a day. So, I mean, ugh. My other job I could definitely afford because I was always doing overtime. Couldn't really do overtime in my other job. But in the other job that I just started, I could get overtime. I could easily pay for that. But then I think what you should do is scrap getting taxed on your overtime. Because the amount of overtime you do, you think, oh, I'm doing all these hours extra. Only to find out that the taxman took most of it. That's not fair. Scrap that. That's one Labour policy, or even a Tory policy. I mean, I guess it's more towards Tories if they want to, you know, save taxes. I would say if you work overtime, it should be tax-free. Right, ladies and gentlemen? If you're working overtime, that should be your money. You shouldn't get taxed. You get taxed more on overtime than you do get taxed normal fucking wages. What's the point in doing overtime then? If you're going to technically lose money, or it's not worth your time. I worked a week of overtime. I was literally crying when I got my wage back. I was like, what was the point in that? Like, it was a joke. Like I mean, wow. So yeah, fucking kibosh that shit, for sure. I could pay my rent with the amount of overtime I could have done. Or should have got. Or I thought I was going to get. And also, why do they always put you on like emergency shit and never change it and then send you a big fat check? Here's the money we owe you back. Like, can't they fix that system instead of charging everybody when they get a job the fucking highest tax you can possibly pay, and then realise that actually no, you shouldn't be paying that tax. You should be paying this bracket of tax, and here's your money back. I always get letters from the Inland Revenue. We owe you money. Really? No jokes. It's a year late. Couldn't you just done it the same fucking day? I got can you just give me that money when I literally had my job instead of tax me for a fucking year and to give me it back a year fucking later? I mean, it's a nice surprise to get money in the post, but I probably would have preferred it in my fucking wage packet. Like, little simple things like that go a long way to getting people into work or doing overtime. Just stupid little things that you wouldn't even think about. Is mad. That can help the workforce. I'm just saying. Like, the government could employ people who are at home, who can do jobs, to work on their phones or work on the phone, do something useful. The government will pay you if you answer the fucking phone for a government department. Can you answer the phone? Are you capable? Do you think you're okay? Do you want to train to help the work? Yes, I could do that. It's a job. Like, just give people incentives. We know it's the 21st century. People can work from home. They're not that fucking retarded. Like everybody, most people know how to use a computer nowadays, right? You tell me you can't pick up a phone and use a computer. If you're trained, it won't take you that long to use a mouse, click, 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 and all that shit. It doesn't take that long. It's bizarre that the government's so inefficient and retarded that it doesn't think of like simple things to help people. They're always saying, well, we want to get people back to work. Yeah, what kind of work? Right? We're a service sector economy, in case anybody's not paying attention. Most people don't do hard labour. We do service sector shit. Now, to be fair, service sector can also mean like retail, because that's service sector, retail. But I mean, there's a fuck ton of people that can work from home, answering phones. I'm one included, right? It's not rocket science. And it's fucking hard to get a job from home. As I'm saying, the government should literally incentivise corporations or just bribe them and say, train these fuckers and give them jobs. Instead of me trolling the internet to find fucking someone who's not trying to rip me off.
But just not done in a thoughtful way, not done in an environmentally friendly way, not done in a way designed to build communities and families and homes for everybody to live in and to feel part of. We need to raise our ambitions with housing, not just on the number, but on the type. And I think garden cities and being very conscious and deliberative about how we put them down and where we put them, I think is the way to do it.
It's a wonderful concept. I think the concern would be sort of like, I guess it almost seems farcical for me to say, you know, you've been in power for 13 years, the party, why haven't you done it before? That sort of rhetoric. Do you think that you'll be able to convince the party to do a big rewrite, to go for these ideas, to rip up what's been going on for the last 10 years, which has been an effective decimation of what could be a garden city?
Well, so the way how I see our time so far in government is that, first of all, we had a coalition for 5 years, and the focus on that in those 5 years was bringing down the deficit. You'll remember the debates of that time. Then David Cameron won a small majority in 2015, and pretty soon after that, he was campaigning for the European referendum, which he then lost. And then you had Theresa May, who then had a short period of time with no mandate. Then she had an election, which she then lost her majority in. We then spent, and in 2017, 6 years ago was when I first came into Parliament, we then spent 2 years torturous debates and arguments about one subject, which was Brexit. Boris Johnson comes in, gets that done, wins a majority, and just when we're getting our heads up, COVID comes. And so it has been difficult in the post-Brexit era to do a lot of the things that we'd like to do. And I'm not saying that everybody will agree with what I'm saying, but I know a lot do. And so I think we have an opportunity with Rishi to say, look, I'm a new leader. He's clearly very different to what has come before. Let's look at things anew. And this is our opportunity. We've got a year or so to do that.
The proposal being then to create a new asset class who will vote for you.
Well, the reason to do it is because if you do the right thing, the votes look after themselves. You know, you can't, in politics, the most successful politicians at any level in any country are the people that will do the right thing over the medium long term. Yes, by being tactically astute and not annoying too many people all the time. You've got to pick.
This is the problem. You're not supposed to run the country based on fucking wisdoms. Right? Like you said, the most successful housing programme we ever had. What did we build, ladies and gentlemen? We didn't build 20 million fucking houses to buy now, did we? No. We built houses to live in. Live in. Right? This is the whole point of this fucking argument about houses. Is the affordability thing is nonsense. It just is. The government can build houses anytime it fucking wants and put it on the credit card. We've got a credit card. It's called the Bank of England. We've done it before. It's not new, ladies and gentlemen. We literally set up a health service after World War II. In case nobody was paying attention, we were fucking skint then as well. Right? We're not skint. The United Kingdom literally brings in 2.3 trillion pound every fucking year. Right? We're not skint. We're far from skint. We're the 5th, 6th biggest economy in the world, right? California's bigger than us, but that's not the same thing. But in terms of GDP per population, we're pretty fucking rich, right? So this idea that we're broke is bollocks. It completely is bollocks. And the whole debt ratio thing is because these clowns gave people easy fucking credit and kept the interest rates low artificially to save a fucking banking system that was a Ponzi scheme to begin with. Giving people houses and then not asking them, can you pay for them, was a recipe for disaster. The other day someone said we should give people 103% fucking mortgages again. This clown just said, no, let's pay 70% and you only pay 36 grand or whatever. No, the entire system is fucked. Stop basing housing on something that it's not. Everybody pays council tax. Why do you pay council tax? To build fucking council houses? Just saying. It's not that hard to work out. The clue is in the fucking name. But yet they want to sell you houses with the taxes that you pay them. So basically you're paying twice and getting shafted at the same fucking time. Much like universal credit is a loan shark system. I need my taxes back, please, because I need help while I look for a job. Well, we can't give you straight away, but you can have a loan. A loan on what exactly? Your tax. Excuse me? Yeah, we're going to make it a loan-based system. What? So I have to pay back taxes on my own tax that I'm entitled to? Yep. People didn't think that was a scam, apparently. These people are literally batshit crazy when it comes to economics, and you wonder why our country is fucked to the fucking hilt. They've got no idea of what to do. They just think capitalism good, socialism bad. And we all know that's fucking bollocks, don't we?
Pick battles, and you've got to be strategic. But if you do the right thing over time, you will get the votes. And I think that is ultimately the feedback loop of democratic politics. And that's why democracies are, broadly speaking, more successful than any other form of government.
It's going to be hard work for you, though. We were just at, sorry. We were just at Best for Britain, who've done their new MRP poll. Now, a lot of what was coming up in focus groups, there was big concerns about the stewardship that the Conservatives have shown over the economy and how people aren't sure, particularly in Surrey, which is a pretty safe place normally for you guys. They're not sure that you can handle the economy. These ideas seem really interesting. They could really bring voters back. But how will you bring back trust and the promise? You know, how can people believe that you're going to deliver all of this?
Yeah, I think that trust is a key thing, right? Because politicians can say whatever. Ultimately, people have to think that not only do you want to do it, but you've got the capacity to do it. How do we do that? I'd say, first of all,
if you know anything about the British, you should know this. Governments don't win elections, they fucking lose them. That's how, like, look at how long we keep our parties in power for, until we get fed up with the fucking cunts, and then they decide, nah, I don't know now. It's not the fact that they can't win, it's just people literally will let them fucking destroy the economy and then go, yeah, these are crap, let's get them out. Same thing happened to Thatcher, same thing happened to Gordon Brown. You're crap, get out. But we'll wait though, we will wait. And this is the problem, is the Tories have run out of steam. They're toast. They're going to be in opposition, and Keir Starmer will be the next Prime Minister. That's a fact. They're fucked. They know they're fucked. Like, they're just hanging on for dear life at this point. And all the scandals, that doesn't matter. It's the fact that if you ask basic people a basic question, do you feel better off now than you did when these fuckers were elected? Answer's no. It just isn't. Nothing is working in this country, and they've been in power all this time. Don't give me the whole shit about COVID and blah blah blah. That's bollocks. They were shafting the country before then. Anybody remember austerity? We were the only country that decided to cut taxes on social programs. Social programs like the police. How many cops did you sack, you twats? Get me saying? Haven't paid anybody for 10 years. Oh, we got to pull up our bootstraps, you know, because we've got no money. Apparently, even though we've got a fucking bank, that's our own credit card. They could have fucking easily kept everything the same and give people money to boost the economy. They did the exact fucking opposite. And who got it the worst? The poor. And here's the fruits of their labour. NHS, good luck. Trains, shite. Post office, they sold it. Just saying, I mean, what the fuck? They sold the post office. Not even a Royal Mail anymore. It's just the Royal Mail in name only, because it's not fucking royal anymore, technically speaking. Like, got rid of our gas, so everyone's gas bills shot up and Putin decided to invade Ukraine. And these guys are complete fucking arse clowns. And they go, well, Rishi Sunak's in power now. It's not the point, mate. It's your whole party is fucking batshit crazy. Just is. And you're economically fucking illiterate in the 21st century. And that's even worse.
The Prime Minister, being so clearly a very different sort of person from his predecessor, needs to be front and centre of that and needs to own the change. And then the second thing.
Explain to me how Rishi Sunak is different from his former boss, Boris Johnson. Or the batshit crazy lady who we lost to, Mr. Lettuce herself, which is Liz Truss. I mean, you can't make it up. These are the people who they literally gave us, right? We had David Cameron, who screwed the pooch on Brexit because he was advised by some fucking lunatic that he was going to win the Brexit vote. Or, what? No, that was never going to happen, but he did it anyway. He said he was going to stay, fucked off the moment he fucking found out they'd lost. I mean, you can't make it up how shit our government's been since they got elected. Literally, I blame Nick Clegg for all the problems of our country. Nick Clegg, because he decided in one moment that it would be better for the Lib Dems to get in bed with the Tories than it would be to get in bed with Labour. How mad's that? So if you want to blame anybody for why the country's fucked, blame the Liberal Democrats.
Is we just have to get some of the basics right. And that's why, though it can sound corny and political, the Prime Minister's 5 priorities, you know, the NHS, you know, cut waiting lists, grow the economy, reduce debt, etc. It's really important that you can show that you can deliver on basics. It's like if you're, you know, if you're in a new relationship with somebody, if somebody's like, oh, I'm going to take you to Paris.
That sounds great if you can do the basics. But the reason why he's talking about them basics, because you fucking broke them. Every single thing he said he wants to get control of, your fucking stupid party is the reason we have them. Like, it's mad the way these fuckers do mental gymnastics on the fact that they fucking broke the country. Them, NHS waiting times, their fault. Strikes, their fault. It's not like this just came from nowhere, mate. It's mad. It's like people, like they say, we've got more police than ever. No, we haven't. That's a lie. You stacked loads of them. And then you want a round of applause because you just hired them back. And it took you fucking how long? You can't make this shit up. That junior doctor, 14 quid an hour to be a junior doctor. Do you know how long that takes and how fucking brainy you have to be a junior doctor? Do you know how much that kid gets paid when he first gets his job? 14 quid an hour. I used to get paid more than that answering a fucking phone. I'm pretty sure I know which one's more important. Me answering a phone or a fucking junior doctor. 14 quid an hour. Oh my fucking days. So yeah, give them a fucking 35% pay rise, thank you very much. And if you don't like it, tax the rich. There's plenty of them to go fucking round. And don't tell me this whole shit about people pay more, the rich pay more taxes. Not a percentage of wealth. Why do you think there's more billionaires than we've ever seen before? I don't know, because you don't tax them.
Okay, fine. But if they won't turn up for a drink in the local pub, and they stand you up, well, that's probably not boding very well for the longer term, right? So
it's an interesting analogy.
We've got to make sure that we are doing the basics and improving on the basics. And over time, I think the public will start to trust us if we can, and once we present to them the future vision, whether it be for millennials and housing like I've been talking about, whether it be the economy more generally, whether it be on areas like the NHS, whatever it is, we've got to...
But you crashed the economy with Liz Truss. You cost the country 40 billion quid. I mean, like, literally, everybody's mortgage rates went up because you elected an ideological, batshit crazy lettuce. Like, literally. Even Rishi Sunak said, if you vote for this crazy bitch, mortgage rates will go up and there'll be a run on the pound. What happened next? Oh, exactly that. He still didn't get voted in though, did he? No. Because we let a bunch of fucking Tory pensioners vote for our Prime Minister, and then they say, well, we live in a democratic country. How the fuck is it democratic to have 3 Prime Ministers without a general election? I'm just asking for a friend.
Be able to show there's a...
In fact, no, sorry, it's 2. Technically speaking, because Boris Johnson actually did win the last election, so give him his dues on that one. But the other 2, nobody voted for them. Nobody at all.
Better future.
Apart from a bunch of old age pensions. But the country didn't. How's that democratic? How? It's not democratic, that's a fucking piss take if I've ever heard one in my life.
But I know that we're not going to be able to do that unless we can deliver on the basics.
Boris Johnson's gone. Do you think that's the end? The end of Boris Johnson? Rishi Sunak is now the new Conservative?
Not the end of... I mean, I'm sure he'll continue to be a sort of amusing media personality. He'll probably be on here soon.
Here's the shits and giggles of it. Rishi Sunak is going to lose the next election. He's going to stand down, and we're going to get Suella Braverman or some right-wing fucking nutter as the leader of the Conservative Party. That, I'm going to bet with anybody that's what's going to happen next. Because that's exactly what's going to happen next. We're going to get a right-wing Kevin McCarthy style fucking retard who runs the Tory party, and the longer they keep that fucker in, the longer they won't be in power. I'm just saying. Because, as you said, the people who vote nowadays, it's not so much about lower taxes, it's fair taxes. If you're going to work, why are my taxes the highest in like fucking 50 odd years? Because the Tories shit. That's why. Right? And don't start going, well, Labour aren't much better. Okay. When was the last time Labour were in power? I think things are better, to be fair. Well, I mean this one. Well, they haven't been in power, so how can you say that the Labour Party are worse if they haven't been in power to do anything for 13 years? That's fucking retarded. It just is. So anybody ever says to you, Labour can't do much better. I remember when I didn't have to wait fucking hours to get a fucking ambulance. I remember that very clearly. It wasn't as bad under Tony Blair as it's bad under these fucking idiots. Put it that way. And who fixed all the shitty hospitals the last time the Tories were in power? Who brought down all the waiting times the last time the Tories were in power? Oh yeah, Labour Party did. Were they perfect? No. Were they better than the fucking Tories? Pretty sure they fucking was. Thatcher was a fucking cunt, and so was John Major. And we all rejoiced as a nation when we kicked them out. Remember? I do.
Bim, with all due respect, I don't quite think that will happen, but we have loved having you here.
Oh, well, it's exactly, me and Boris, the same thing. No, I do think it's the end for him as a Conservative Party politician, because I think that the Conservative Party wants to move forward. You know, when the day that Boris resigned, I was speaking, I happened to speak at 2 separate Conservative associations that day, and I was expecting lots of people to say, oh, you know, what a shame it is that he's gone, etc. And people just said, you know what? Some people said I liked him, some people said I didn't like him, but they all just said, look, we've just got to move forward. We've got to look forward. Let's just move past that, and let's focus on new leader, new team, new party, and deliver for the people.
Palpable fury, though, with some factions.
What, with Boris?
Yeah, I think particularly with the COVID bereaved group, we just had a few in this morning. There is some palpable fury with them about what went down. So it'll be a hard job for you, but a possible job to convince those people.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I think on COVID, and this is less about, to be honest, it's less about Boris himself, because obviously, yes, he was the Prime Minister, but there's a whole British state that was trying to deal with COVID. I actually think people need to be a little bit fairer on the broader British state. I think that they were faced with something completely unprecedented, at least in our life and living memory. And they made some mistakes initially, but so did every country. You look at any country's record, every country made mistakes. And they did get to a much better position, and we did get out of lockdown faster than most places, and we got the vaccine faster than anywhere else. That didn't all happen by accident. But what it also showed, if we're very honest, are some of the weaknesses in our state structures, weaknesses in our public health system, weaknesses in how effectively we could get things done.
That's because you stripped the country of basic essentials that we pay tax for. Police, NHS, GPs, dentistry. I mean, all these mad things that, like, you would think, oh, the government could run that pretty... No. I mean, they should be able to run it pretty easy, but they're just incompetent. This is my point. The country's not a shit country, right? Our politicians are shit, though. They're literally... It's amazing some of the shit that I listen to politicians say, and I just go, are you fucking kidding me? Even the media, honestly, I find at times, are even fucking stupider than the politicians are. Like, some of the questions they ask them, I just think, who gave you a job? Like, really? Who gave you a job? Especially when you watch the likes of the BBC and stuff like that. I just think, wow. They're always this fair and biased, stupid shit that they always fucking waffle. Especially on the BBC. Because they're always scared of losing a TV licence. So the editors and the producers always keep them in line. No, this is what you're going to talk about this week. Right? So they give you the topics that the British people talk about. If you're being spoon-fed, the migrants are coming to get you. Well, what are you going to think's the main topic on Question Time on the Thursday? The exact same shit that the BBC's been feeding you. There's proper loads of important things going on in the world, but they selectively give you a narrative to talk about. Right? That's the problem with media. They suggestively tell you what the issues are. Not the actual issues. They suggest you certain type of issues. Like one of them I've been banging on about housing. Why is nobody saying we need more council houses? At all? Why is it always the same bullshit about affordability? Fucking crackpot, fucking weird shit. Because they're all neoliberals. They're all in their little silos. They don't do anything really for the British public. They do it for themselves and their fucking cronies in the city. And it's sad. Because that's how our country's been run. And that's why it's a shithole. Because we let people who supposedly like capitalism, let capitalism run a fucking mock. And that's not how capitalism's supposed to work. Not when you're in a country that's democratic. Right? You're supposed to limit capitalism. That's what you're supposed to do. Don't let it run riot. Or you just end up with fascism. Not the same thing.
Weaknesses in how the Union worked, where you had Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland all doing different things and that not linking up with England. And there were weaknesses in the British state. I think that we need to tackle those, and I think that they were laid bare. Weaknesses in our industrial policy, the fact that we couldn't produce the PPE that we needed in our own country, and we had to...
Because you sold it. Like the gas. Closed it. You literally can't make this up. It's his government that fucked us over. It's crazy shit.
Rely on China, at least in the early days and the first few months, to produce a lot of the PPE. That is a huge weakness economically. So there are weaknesses in our system. I don't want to sugarcoat those, but I do think that on that at least, Boris, did do a reasonable job, and the British state did get the country through what was a very, very difficult time. And I think people forget when some people say, "Oh, we spent too much money over COVID. I think we spent something in the region of 400 to 450 billion pounds. I mean, it was a huge amount of money.
Yeah. And that was how long into Boris Johnson's premiership? And how much did he borrow when he got elected? How much did he borrow? How much did the Chancellor say he borrowed? Is more interesting. 600 billion quid. 600 billion. I mean, like I said, because I stream this, I know this, right? But these politicians are very goldfish memories. And even the people in the media, like when he said that, I would have said to him, you also borrowed 600 billion, didn't you? I'm just saying. So that's a lot of money too, right? Just saying. Like, what the fuck? I wish people would be like more, not softbally, but just point out facts that just go against the bullshit that I hear all the time. Like, point out the fucking obvious for once. So you borrowed 600 billion when he was elected as Prime Minister, and then COVID happened and you spent 400 billion. Now, did you borrow that separately from the 600 billion, or was that already from the 600 billion you borrowed? Which one is it? Because I don't even know that. I'm just saying. We should probably check, shouldn't we?
And yeah, I myself at times thought, gosh, maybe we shouldn't be spending money on this or we shouldn't be spending money on that. But I don't remember the public at the time saying that. I remember the public at the time saying they wanted more support, they wanted more help, they wanted more money spent in lots of different ways. I'm not saying the public was wrong to do that. But again, after the event, it's easy for some people to say, oh, well, the reason why we've now got, to pay some of this money back and the economy is a bit sluggish and taxes are a bit high.
We've got to pay back the Bank of England. Use our own credit card. Oh, don't get me started on that shit. And the whole thing's a scam, like I said. It's a bit weird. And the fact that we've got our own bank, it's weird. Give me the power to print money. I don't give a fuck who's in charge.
Is because of this huge £450 billion bill. Well, it was a national emergency of the greatest order that for at least a few months we didn't know could be solved by a vaccine at all. So it was a really, really difficult problem, and I think that
I just love the fact that he's just making up reality in his own mind. Like, I could literally find a video of the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rishi Sunak, literally gloating that he's spending more than Jeremy Corbyn's fucking government. Jeremy Corbyn proposed borrowing 400 billion. Oh, we're going to go broke because he's borrowing 400 billion. Rishi Sunak goes, nah, we're borrowing 6. And what did the Tory backbenchers do? They called Boris Johnson a socialist. You can't make it up. Called Boris Johnson a socialist. And if you watched the Politics Live earlier before, the guy talking about Boris Johnson, he was one of the backbenchers saying, why have we got locked down and why are you spending all this money? And why are you borrowing all this money? We're Conservatives. You're running up the national debt. I mean, literally, these guys are fucking clueless. You got right-wingers and centre-right. As the other bird said, it's a hodgepodge. We need to have different parties who literally believe in different things. The whole idea of a broad church is a fucking scam. That's to win power, right? So anytime you hear the Tories say, it's a broad church, bullshit. Anytime you hear the Tories say it, Labour, bullshit. SNP, bullshit. We should have actual parties that actually represent what they fucking say, not because they want to get in power. Stupid cunts. Ridiculous. But I just thought that video was fascinating in terms of, like, you got a Tory slightly coming to a centre saying, you know what's a good idea? Building social housing. Yeah, it is. We did it before Thatcher came around. As you clearly pointed out, right? 50s, 60s and 70s, we built council houses. Thatcher got no power, kiboshed a lot of it. Just saying. And for the Labour Party to not even mention social housing, what they should come out with is we're going to build 300,000 council homes or some shit, or 1 million. Just say something Instead of saying, we need affordable housing. You just sound like a fucking Tory to me, mate. Same old fucking bullshit. Anyway, I thought that video was interesting. I thought you should listen to it. The full thing, without me interrupting it, is Politics Joe. I'm pretty sure you can find him on the YouTubes, because I can't add it straight away, the link. But I appreciate Joe not kiboshing me, hopefully. I did interrupt for a reason, because I did want to commentate on it anywho. But yeah, if you want a full watch, without me waffling, it's on Politics Joe, and it's only done 3 hours ago, so it's pretty fresh. It's not like a week old or whatever. And if you want more fun, you can watch Suella Braverman literally get her arse taken apart after Select Committee, which I'm about to watch because it's funny. Anywho, I will see you all tomorrow. Question time, Politics Live, and then Sunday, I'm supposing. Enjoy the rest of your day. It's fucking hot outside, so put your suntan lotion on. Ta-da.
Ultimately, we handled it reasonably well.
Well, I think we'll leave it there. I've really enjoyed speaking to you, Ben.
Oh, you too.
So
really enjoyed it.
Thanks for coming in.
Thank you.